Hey everyone, we're back again, another episode of AWS What's Next. Many of you may be tuning in for the first time. I know we have these episodes somewhat infrequently, but we're trying to up that cadence a little bit because there's a lot of really exciting launches to cover. But again, if you haven't been here before, AWS What's Next is the show where Rob and I over here try to cover the latest and greatest launches from Amazon Web Services. And in particular, we know there's a lot of different ways that you can consume this launch information. One of the things we're really passionate about is actually showing you these launches in action. So we bring some of the service team members out, we get them to show us a little bit of a demo, and we all have a good time. We've got some folks in chat saying happy Friday. Yes, happy Friday indeed. Hopefully this is as fun for all of you as it is for us to close out our work week. But again, joining me today, well, my name is Nick Walsh, developer advocate, co-host of AWS What's Next, and joining me over here is
one of these directions. We'll figure it out. Yeah, I'm Robert with AWS, and Nick and I have been running a couple episodes of this show already. If you're a return viewer, welcome back. If you're brand new, I think you're in for a treat. This episode, as Nick mentioned, we're changing the format very slightly to kind of spend more time with fewer launches. We feel like this is a good change overall because we get to go deeper with the expert guests that we have on the show. But if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. As always, we'll have links to fill out a survey or just many other ways to submit your feedback. So please share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, and again, Rob mentioned live show. So we are watching in chat on both Twitch and LinkedIn. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, wondering how this given service integrates with your stack, just let us know. We're happy to bring those up on stream and answer them. Again, live on twitch.tv and LinkedIn Live. So regardless of where you're tuning in from platform or part of the world or what hour it is over by you, we're happy to have you here. We're probably going to run for about, roughly an hour and a half, 2 hours. But again, really dialing in on the on the demos and actually getting a deeper dive on the launches that we're going to be covering today. But we would be remiss if we did not mention the fact that there are too many launches for us to be able to cover all of them, right, Rob? Like, it would take us hours to cover every single launch between each of our episodes. So what we like to do here in the beginning of the show is do a little bit of an opener for all of the guests that are not able to make it today, that Rob and I think are worthy of, or are stand out enough that we think we want to make sure that you're updated on. So we go through the launches. There's the launch blog post. There's lots of different avenues there, and we pick out a select few of them that we like to cover before we get into some of the demos.
Yeah, definitely. And these are, by the way, if you want to follow these, you can also take a look at our launch blog. We have a lot of really great blog posts and articles that take you in depth into some of these features. A lot of these features, when we launch them, we like to launch a corresponding document that explains in detail with code samples, how do you start using this thing today, right? And so that's one of the things that I think is coolest about these launches. None of the launches are ever fluff. It's always, how do you put this into action today? So without further ado, we have 4 launch posts for you today. 2 of them are related to RDS, so we'll start with those. The first one is regarding the availability of RDS on Outpost. Now, Outposts, for those of you who haven't heard of it, an AWS Outpost is basically, think of it as your own on-demand AWS data center. If you run a factory or you have a data center where you need ultra-low latency that you just can't have, you can't deal with the latency of connecting to an AWS data center or a POP or an edge location, this is for you, right? It's basically, we send you a rack with our custom hardware, including the Nitro system, including customizable amounts of compute, storage, memory, networking, etc. You plug it in, you provide network capacity, and then it basically shows up in your console as a standalone AWS region, and then all of the same APIs are available. Now, one of the things that most common questions we get with Outpost is, well, what services are available? What is the schedule for launching them? And of course, at the beginning, we wanted to get Outpost into customers' hands and start getting feedback so that we can know what direction to take it. And and we're constantly increasing these services. And this is what this announcement is about. RDS, one of our most popular and fast-growing services, relational database service, is now available on Outpost in 2 different formats. As you know, RDS on a mature AWS region has 5 different database engines backing it, and it's available now on Outpost with 2 of those engines, MySQL and Postgres in particular. And then we're going to be adding support for more database engines coming soon. And then we also have another RDS related announcement, which is Rds Proxy. Nick, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So RDS Proxy is really exciting. We announced it previously at reInvent 2019, which it was going into, I believe, public preview or private preview. Well, public preview because that's why we were announcing it. But the general availability of RDS Proxy is very exciting. So for folks that are especially interested in doing, let's say, like authoring serverless applications, right? If you're using a database like DynamoDB built from the ground up to handle extremely large amounts of concurrency and extremely large amounts of connections at any one point in time, that's always worked very well. But something that's emerged that is also necessary is the need to have this sort of functionality for relational databases. So for those that aren't familiar, RDS, Relational Database Service, offers fully managed offerings with underlying engines like familiar underlying engines like MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, what have you. But traditionally, this sort of middle of the road issue of like, well, I have my clients, they need to access the database, and then I have my database, and I'm confident in how that's running operationally. You still need this sort of proxy in between the two of them to be able to manage that connection pooling, lest you end up blowing up your connection pools on the database, or you end up incurring the cost to scale up very expensive database infrastructure when you can simply have some sort of middleware to do that. Now, that involves a lot of challenges and essentially this is a word you'll hear very often on the show, but undifferentiated heavy lifting. The math, the science, and the engineering work that goes into optimizing and developing and managing your own proxy for a relational database is oftentimes not differentiated for your business. And so the release of Amazon RDS Proxy really helps to sort of push that value that the RDS suite of offerings gives further upstream. So you can essentially have an RDS proxy that sits in front of your RDS database. It handles a lot of really nifty things like automatically doing service discovery, where if your RDS instance sort of fails over, or you have disaster recovery, you can automatically find the underlying RDS instances and all of that, and handles all that internetworking between the proxy and the database. And then your client applications can hit a static endpoint for the RDS proxy, and your RDS proxy can have separate scaling mechanisms from the underlying database itself, so that you have a cost-optimized deployment. Lots on RDS this week, Rob.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said lots on RDS this week. We're coming out. We're available in Outposts and RDS Proxy now GA. So some exciting stuff on that front. But I apologize to the database lovers. We do have to move on from database-related launches. Next up, we do have one with Ground Truth. And for followers of the show, Ground Truth is no stranger here. On prior weeks, we showed a new launch for 3D point clouds, which have a lot of applications with autonomous vehicles and LiDAR as a measurement mechanism or a measuring device for those 3D point clouds. And this week, we have another very exciting launch for Ground Truth. Again, SageMaker Ground Truth is a data labeling service that makes it really easy for you to delegate tasks of data labeling to a workforce and automate or streamline the process by which you can create those data labeling sort of interfaces to make that very simple. So this week, the exciting launch with SageMaker Ground Truth is the ability to have more quality of life improvements for labeling videos. So labeling videos is very challenging for a lot of reasons, but if I could stroke a very broad brush here, it's like take all the challenges of labeling an image and now assume that those are running 30 images per second or 60 images per second for the duration of your video. So the amount of work increases exponentially. One of the most common things that customers want to do when labeling video is actually track objects as they move across a frame. And now think of the tediousness of maybe animating something by hand frame by frame. Now imagine that for data labeling across all of your videos. So a very exciting launch here for SageMaker Ground Truth is the ability to optimize or automate the tracking of objects automatically. So the way this is going to work is you can upload your video as the task. You can create in maybe the beginning, but as well as a handful of other keyframes throughout. And SageMaker Ground Truth can take a best guess at tracking that object through all of the intermediary frames, by which you as the reviewer can then go in and modify them. So essentially what it's doing is reducing the complexity of the amount of work from frame by frame to one or just a handful of keyframes, and it will interpolate all of the others for you, thus making the cost per video label or cost per unit of time significantly lower. One of the really exciting use cases of this is actually with the National Football League, the NFL. So they actually use this to be able to track helmets on screen for their players, and then as a result of that, they can track things like the position and assume things like the velocity of the players on the field, and that leads to a host of other downstream analytics that can be produced from there. But trying to manage tracking all of those players and all of the parts of their body in real time is a very difficult task. But SageMaker Ground Truth helps to make that possible for pre-recorded data sets.
Yeah, and our final announcement for the day for the news section is IoT Sitewise. Now, I think this requires a little bit of setup. If we think about the pace that IoT has been taking over the last couple of years, it's been really incredible. And one area where we see this is in manufacturing. The amount of intelligence that these devices have on a modern assembly line, for example, for a vehicle or for consumer goods or electronics, has really skyrocketed. And what that means is that what used to be a factory floor with a lot of complex industrial equipment now has all of this intelligence and sensors and data that's being built into it, right? So you might have a sensor that says like, hey, how many widgets is this machine producing? What is the error rate? How many do we have to discard? Is there some sort of, what is the level of efficiency that it's operating at? Does it have enough all of the components to do its job? So it might be spewing out this data constantly. And then now that in turn, that's great, you have that now. But that creates a challenge in terms of how do you aggregate that data? How do you organize it? How do you analyze it? How do you use it to derive business insights? Most importantly, how do you know that something is wrong and needs somebody to go and look at this thing, right? And this has been a problem for a lot of different industries, especially as their technology gets more and more advanced. These devices become smarter and smarter. So that's why we built IoT Sitewise. And what this really does for you is it's a piece of software that runs in Gateway in your location. And what it can do is it can basically act as a proxy for gathering all this information. So imagine that you are one of these factory floor managers, and you want to have a single place to look at the health and the efficiency of your factory floor. This is what the AWS IoT Sitewise, it's a mouthful to say, but this is what this product delivers. So it's extremely focused, built directly as a result of customer feedback, who are really getting into this IoT space. So if you're in that space, if you're manufacturing, check it out. We'll have a link in the chat.
Awesome. Well, Rob, I just realized that we mentioned we were going to do some news before getting into the demos, but I don't want to keep the fans at home waiting. Let's give them a little hint of what they have to look forward to, because we're about to get into the first demo. But today we're going to be covering two very exciting launches with representatives from the service team showing us them in action. First up is going to be Amazon Code Guru. We're going to be back in just a moment with that one. But later on in the show, launch from just this week, I believe, or last week, which was AWS App2Container. So again, we don't want to spill the beans too much on the details. We'll save that for the sessions. But again, live show. Get your questions in on chat. Also, I believe later on in the show, we will have a survey. So if you have any feedback, positive, negative, anywhere in between, we'd love to hear it. I believe there's also going to be some AWS credit for those that complete the survey. So be on the lookout for that. I know we're still live with this episode, but if you're looking to catch up on any prior episodes, we also have a podcast. We will have the links to that in the description, but if you search for AWS What's Next on some of the major podcasting platforms, you should be able to find that. So without further ado, we'll be setting up with the first guest. We'll be right back just a few seconds. I promise you we'll be very quick. And then without further ado, we'll be getting into Amazon Code Guru. So sit tight. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Here there was a little bit of a stream crash over on LinkedIn Live. Hopefully you're watching this now and that one is back up. For those at Twitch, I apologize for the wait, but thank you for sticking through us. Thank you for sticking through with us. And speaking of with us, joining us for a very exciting session here about Amazon Code Guru is Daniela Cvetkova from the Amazon Code Guru team. Daniela, thank you for taking the time today to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Nick, and really good to be with you.
Awesome.
Welcome, Daniela.
Yeah, welcome. This was a launch that I think made a pretty big splash back at reInvent. I know a lot of people have been waiting in anticipation to see more of it, see it in action, and we will get into that a little bit later. But let's start very, very high level. Daniela, what is Code Guru?
Sure, Nick. I would like to answer this question, but before we go into this, let's go into what problems it's actually solving. And I'm going to switch to my screen.
Sure.
Okay. So imagine a typical week for a software developer.
Oh, hold on, Daniela. I don't think you're sharing just yet.
Oh, I'm not sharing. True.
So it's the beauty of live production.
Yeah.
Awesome. You're coming through now.
Okay, now let's get back to our typical week.
How meta, by the way. Video stream not sharing is very typical of the typical software developer.
But if you're a software developer, most likely you're spending a lot of time writing code and reviewing the code, building it, testing it, unit test, performance test, all of that, deploying it, running it, enabling some sort of monitoring and logging, and sometimes there could be issues, in which case you would need to resolve them. And then rinse and repeat. And then in a typical week, or let's say a month, if you're lucky, what could happen is that you have buggy or inefficient codes that somehow doesn't get caught during code reviews. When you run your tests, sometimes you don't have sufficient coverage. And when you set up your monitoring, I mean, monitoring is great. You need to make sure that you set up all the alarms and metrics correctly. And oftentimes when you have those alarms, it means that it's already too late, the problem has happened. In addition to that, you also have cost issues related to your application. So is your application efficient enough? Are you running it the way that, in the most economical way, or are you spending more money than you should? And finally, when you have operational issues, oftentimes, it takes longer than you would expect. This means that you're not able to go back to your writing your code, creating new functionality, but also you're impacting your customers and your business. And so with this in mind, we created Amazon Code Guru to solve these problems. And Code Guru is a developer tool which is powered by machine learning. And it provides intelligent recommendations to improve your code quality. And it also identifies your applications, your live applications, most expensive lines of code. And it actually has two distinct features, which we're going to go into deeper detail later. But very briefly, we have Amazon Code Guru Reviewer, which is a service that uses machine learning to identify important critical issues that are difficult to find even by sometimes the most experienced engineer. With this, you improve the code quality of your application. And in addition to that, you get recommendations how to fix those issues. With Code Guru Profiler, you can optimize the performance of your application because you get help on identifying the most expensive line of code. You get help troubleshooting performance issues. And on top of that, as an extra bonus, you can improve the cost to run your application, the infrastructure cost. Just to give you a very brief overview of where do these two services play in this whole software development lifecycle. You have Code Guru Reviewer that provides these code reviews during your the phase where you write and review your code. Then profiler plays in several places. When you do your performance testing, you want to make sure that you catch any performance issues before they even get to production. Now you can ask me the question, well, why don't you catch those problems with reviewer? And the truth is that to some extent, reviewer can catch some of them, but what you want to avoid is the trap of premature optimization. This means that you really want to optimize code where it impacts you in the live application. There's no point trying to optimize everything. And then finally, you are going to run Profiler on production. It's going to run continuously with very low overhead, and you're going to catch all these anomalies that Profiler is monitoring, so that you know early in advance when something is about to go wrong. And finally, when you have an issue, you can use the insights that the Profiler provides for the most expensive lines of code, as well as the visualizations that tell you where you're spending the most of your time. So I'm going to close out my screen.
Sure. Yeah. And so, that was a great overview. There's, it's clear that I think to a lot of people that have authored software before and have to deploy it and manage it, that there's a lot of problems and friction points in such a process. I know when you said writing bugs in your code is part of the typical software process, my eyes lit up because that's all of the code I write has bugs, many of them. But it really feels like these two, the profiler and the reviewer are two main phases, right? Like one is sort of like the static portion of like, analyzing the code as is, and then there's sort of the more active portion with profiling it to achieve insight as to like expensive lines of code and downstream, like optimization of how that code runs separate from just the bugs that exist sort of inherently, right?
Yeah.
Now, Danielle, I'm going to break protocol here and ask you a question about a future feature. When is Code Guru going to be able to write code for me?
Are you sure you want somebody else to write code for you?
Absolutely.
If it uses machine learning, why not?
Yeah, I welcome our machine learning overlords. In all seriousness, I think you made a lot of really good points, and I think that some of them deserve a slight bit of elaboration, because they're really, you really need to kind of do this for a while before you appreciate how useful a tool like this is. You mentioned premature optimization. I want to share a very, very short story here. So when I was working at Microsoft a couple years ago, I still remember to this day, we had a code review, and this is your point of like, what kinds of things can code reviews catch? And I was working with a very talented teammate, and he said, "You're making a copy of this string. You shouldn't do that." And we spent, a long time debating about the impact of copying this string on the actual performance of the application. And it turns out that through a lot of manual profiling, that copying that string did not affect the performance of the application in the slightest. Now, what we did discover unexpectedly is that our application was spending a long time in places that we had never expected, right? And I think this concept has been reinforced over and over and over again for me, where I now have zero trust in my ability to, in advance, identify where the code bottlenecks will be. Often when I think that a particular area will be slow, I'm like, oh, look, we're doing a O of n squared loop over here, right? That's going to be slow. We know O of n squared is bad. Can we make this log n? So we spend a day fixing that out. It turns out if n is not large enough, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So we end up wasting time fixing things that are not the bottleneck, while the things that are bottlenecks just kind of slip by, right? Especially in the age of modern package managers, you're like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that. npm install and then call some other package, and it turns out that package is extremely slow in your critical path, and that introduces a huge performance bottleneck. So I think this idea of premature optimization really kind of slices two ways. It has something to do with the fact that we're just not very good at identifying where the bottlenecks in our code are going to be. The system is just too complex to keep in your head, and we're not good compilers. Our brains are not built for that, right? And so having software and tools that help you do that is really important, and I really appreciate that we have a feature like that here.
Yeah, and you mentioned something really important, and it's the element of surprise. And I cannot stress this enough. You think that you know your application. I've seen so many developers looking at the application runtime data with the profiler saying, well, I didn't expect my application to spend so much time here. And it happens over and over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we've sort of arrived at this outcome where it's, it becomes an insurmountable challenge for people to be their own best tools for introspection of profiling their code. So the obvious answer to me is, okay, well, let's profile our applications. But it seems that a lot of companies are not doing this. So Danielle, I know you're far more in the loop on this than I am. Why are companies not profiling more often with automated tools, and how is CodeGuru changing this?
So, I mean, there are multiple reasons why this is not happening as much as it should. One of the reasons is the perception that profilers are difficult. And I've spoken to engineers who say, well, it's difficult, it takes time, I don't have time. This is more meant for performance engineers. I'm not a performance engineer. Well, it doesn't run on production. Then you tell them actually some profilers run on production, well, it requires setup. So lots and lots of reasons. And the other one is deciphering all the information that profilers provide. It's a bit of a learning curve, and people just they first need, people need to see the benefit before they invest the time. And I think that one thing that I've seen is that there's just not enough understanding of how extremely useful profiling is to help the performance of your application. I just feel like there's not enough good stories of personal wins achieved by using profiling. Now, what CodeGuru Profiler does is it cuts across all these difficulties of, oh, too much information, I don't know how to use it. And with the feature that I'm going to show later on, which is the recommendation reports, it really looks at your runtime application and it says, well, this is the problems that I identified and this is how to fix them. So it doesn't get any simpler than that. Well, maybe simpler is that it fixes the code for you, but we're working on that.
The simplest UX is where it just writes the code from the start and there's no need to make amendments at all. But that I'll leave that PR FAQ to Rob at some point in time. So awesome. So profiling traditionally seems to have this tough reputation. People this ownership problem of maybe it's not in my wheelhouse to be doing this. So with CodeGuru, I'd imagine here that I heard a little rumor that this was like we've had similar tools internally, and that was the inspiration to being able to bring CodeGuru to other people because we saw many performance gains using it, and we know that other developers would see that as well. Is that true, or am I just totally making things up?
Absolutely true. We've been running CodeGuru Profiler internally on many applications and for the last several years, and it's been a phenomenal success. We have saved so much money in different ways, and I'm going to go really deep into this, what we mean by saving money and most expensive lines of code and what all that means. But due to the phenomenal success that Profiler has had internally, we said, well, it's making our life easier. It's saving us money. Let's make it available to our customers.
Yeah, always an exciting value proposition. Being able to, it's like making a piece of software and putting it out in the world and hoping people like it is one thing, but knowing that at Amazon scale we've used this and achieved a lot of value is almost like, well, we know that customers are gonna, get value out of this too. So always a nice origin story.
I want to hear more about this most expensive line of code.
Sure. So what we mean by most expensive lines of code, it's the sort of expense that you really don't want to spend and that you could have saved yourself spending. And us helping you find that wasteful line of code or dangerous line of code is going to save you all this money. So what does that mean? is the line of code that can cause your application to crash or have performance issues. Is the line of code that is going to have make your application run in a more costly way. It's the line of code that's going to prevent your developer from spending their time developing new functionality because they have to fight the problem. And basically it's a thing that shouldn't have happened, and yet it happens, and we provide an answer how to fix it.
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned that, I want to connect this with one of the threads going on in chat here. I think Tesseract, if I'm pronouncing that name correctly, is asking why we run this thing continuously as opposed to running it in an endurance or a stress test. And let me put that question to you, but also kind of start off with a thought of my own. It occurs to me that one of the benefits of running this thing continuously is the time to detection of an issue, right? So imagine that we've been building a piece of software together, and we've been working on this for years, and we've never run a profiler. And we suddenly turn the profiler on, or we run the profiler within the context of a stress test, and we discover all these performance problems with it, right? How exactly do we go about fixing that? The act of fixing that itself, by the way, is going to introduce more bugs, almost certainly, right? And so depending on what the situation is, it might be a very, very expensive process to kind of work back that technical debt. But I think one of the benefits, at least to me, is that when you run a continuous profiler, you're detecting performance regressions. You can establish something like a performance baseline, and per check-in, you can say, in the integration environment, does this regress the mainline performance of the following test cases, right? And the reason why I feel like that's nearly a superpower is because there's this very interesting relationship between the time that the defect is discovered and how much it costs to fix. And there's some research out there that indicates that this actually goes up exponentially. So if you can catch a defect, let's say while you're coding or while you're designing or in the test phase, before the feature ships out to live customers, it's actually relatively easy to fix because you're not dealing with all of the consequent features and the relationships that code has to other pieces of code. But if you discover a bug a year later and all these layers of code have been added on top of it, it's very, very difficult to tease it apart, right? And so I think that's my take on the value of continuous monitoring. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to do it at the earliest possible phase or stage where it makes sense. So in other words, what we said earlier, you don't want to prematurely optimize. So you're going to be running reviewer so that you catch all the defects to the extent possible. And then you're going to be stress testing or performance testing under load your application to try and catch as much as possible from any of those performance issues that your code may have introduced. And to do that, you'll be running synthetic load, which is trying to emulate, but not 100% a real production environment. And then once you run the profiler, your application on production with the profiler all the time, it's going to continuously monitor for deviations or anomalies, the performance of your application, and it's going to find these most expensive lines of code. It's going to be providing this data available for you for if something crashes or has a performance issue, so that when the problem has already happened, the data is already there for you. If you were to enable it only when the problem happens, then it might already be too late, because you want to be seeing, well, how did my profile look when things were good? And how does it look now that things have gone south?
So we've really sort of delved into the category of essentially how this profiler is working under the hood. So when we're thinking about applications that this can work for, are there any limitations or any particular classes of applications that CodeGuru Profiler is compatible with?
So currently, CodeGuru Profiler works for JVM, any application that runs in the JVM, so Java, Kotlin, Scala, Clojure, and so on. And it supports any sort of compute environment. So this means, EC2, ECS, EKS. It runs also on AWS Lambda and even on on premises.
And one other part of that, when I think about using a new tool that's going to, track the performance of my application or measure it in some way, I immediately start worrying, like what sort of setup or integration cost is this going to yield for me, right? Do I need to change code? Do I have to inject decorators in my code to run this profiling? What does that look like for CodeGuru?
Yeah, so I can show you a very extremely quick demo for this, and the answer to this is no, you don't need to change codes. All you need to do is to start your application with a command line Java agent switch, and that's it.
Sure. Do you want to walk us through that now, or we can do that in a little bit? Up to you.
We can do that in a little bit.
Okay, cool. Also, I know some people are talking in chat. Danielle mentioned previously that there's two main components to CodeGuru, the profiler and sort of the I believe it's the analyzer, or the reviewer. I'm blanking on the second one. Reviewer. We actually will have a second guest on in just a little bit that will talk about reviewers. So we're diving deep here on the profiler. We'll see a demo of that, and we'll also get another guest with another demo for reviewer later on. So sit tight. We're not ignoring your questions in chat. We'll loop those back in just a bit. But again, sort of bringing the conversation back, you mentioned, again, establishing a baseline is imperative because if you're already sort of experiencing troubles in production, you have no standard or normal baseline to compare to. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of those algorithms or the anomaly detection around how CodeGuru Profiler decides that things may be awry?
Yeah, absolutely. So CodeGuru looks at the profile of your application. And what is a profile? A profile is essentially an aggregation of the stack traces of your application over a given period of time that have been smashed together, aggregated. And we know where you're spending, in which methods you're spending, what percentage of your time, or active CPU time or workflow time. Anomaly detection works on the line of code level or the method level where the machine learning algorithms have been written in such a way that a CodeGuru Profiler knows which methods to monitor for anomalies, and it continuously adjusts itself over time so that it knows what constitutes an anomaly versus not. Because, for example, when you have seasonality, that's not really an anomaly. It's just something that happens all the time. So we want to reduce the noise to the extent possible. And then when this happens, an anomaly is something that really changes, and it's something that you want to look into. It could be CPU suddenly spiking up or CPU going down. In addition to the machine learning algorithms automatically detecting anomalies, you as a developer can also further, if you want, help CodeGuru Profiler to learn based on what you think is an anomaly. And I'll show you shortly what I mean by that.
So real quick thing here, based on everything you described so far, it sounds like CodeGuru Profiler is a sampling profiler. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. The reason why it is a sampling profiler is because we wanted to reduce the overhead. So Profiler collects only enough data to be statistically significant. It usually does this by sampling the stack traces every 1 second on some or all of your instances. It depends. Like if you have a lot of instances, we're not going to run on all of them. But again, it's all about statistical significance.
Yeah, so interesting. There's the 1 second runs once per second, but you also mentioned earlier that you can run this with Lambda and EKS. So is this going to run once per second per instance of the JVM?
It's algorithmic, so this is the average, but it's going to change based on how the control plane is making it run. The point that I'm trying to make is that we are trying to limit the overhead to around 1% CPU utilization.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, because you mentioned also earlier that you have to gather statistically significant data, right? If you're sampling once per second, I run for 10 seconds, I don't have enough samples to really form a picture of what's going on with my. So do you have does our model kind of capture at what point we have statistically significant data that we can trust?
Yes, absolutely does. We have this mathematical brain or statistical brain that knows how much is enough, and that is also varied for Lambda, because Lambda starts and stops, and the control plane knows at what point it has gathered enough information.
That is really cool. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, one of the things that's becoming really clear to me, I've never performed extensive or automated profiling of an application. I've done some manual testing here and there, but it is sort of bridging this gap between the actual capability to capture the necessary data, but then also this giant leap forward of actually making that information digestible and actionable, right? Because the things you've described so far, Daniela, are like, okay, well, there's going to be some sort of report or an output of this so that I don't have to just read raw logs. There's also this, anomaly detection so that I can understand that I'm actually looking at data that probably means something. There is some sort of deviation from the norm here, and even with the sort of knobs to tune to make that even easier, I don't have to worry about running tests to see if my algorithm is going to detect the problems I want it to. A lot of this sort of last mile problem of detecting or again making this data actionable is sort of dealt automatically through profiler.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about, you said there's some automation under the hood with how this would work on a fleet, or multiple pieces of infrastructure. I mentioned here at the top of the broadcast that this was announced by Andy Jassy in the keynote over at reInvent 2019. I believe there was a launchpad session covering a little bit about this, but some months have gone by now. Is there anything in particular that's new with CodeGuru Profilers since when we first announced it that folks may not be familiar with?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the features I've already mentioned. So anomaly detection using machine learning is a new feature. I'm going to show you briefly what it looks like. Support for AWS Lambda profiling is also a new feature. Another one that I can think of is improvements in the visualizations, which I haven't talked much about, but I will show you what they look like, where we tell you, well, this color, I call it color my code. Essentially, it's a way for us to tell you this code here is yours, and that code here is a library that you're calling or a framework. So it really helps you look at the code that you can actually change. Another one is ability to send, set up CloudWatch metrics for the recommendations. And also, we now show you the dollar value of the recommendations, which is super cool, because that can help you improve the prioritization of all these issues that we find for you. To look at the dollar value, I mean, you can make up your mind which one you want to fix first.
Wait a second, Daniela. Does that include the cost of your software engineering team?
This one is priceless.
Yes, of course.
Well, I feel bad because every time I try to ask you for some more context, Daniela, you're like, yeah, and I'll show you eventually. It'll be clear when you see it in action. So, I think we all have a very good understanding of sort of where Profiler fits in, and I guess I can speak on behalf of everyone here by saying, are we going to be able to see this in action? I know that's what we promise here on What's Next, but are we going to be able to see a demo for Profiler today?
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen now.
Great.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, can you see everything?
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. So I've jumped really like straight into the recommendation report. So remember, I told you we find the most expensive lines of code or the deviations from normal. So this is for the application, which by the way we call profiling group. Image processing web app, and as you can see, we have 5 recommendations. Now, what is a recommendation report? It actually consists of 2 types of messages. One is anomalies, which are things that could impact the stability and reliability of your application. And the other one is a more specific assessment of how performant your application is and what is wrong with it specifically, with an explanation of how to fix it. So let's go through the anomaly first. So as you can see here, we have an anomaly with the file zip file.getEntry. You can clearly see that this is an anomaly. The reason why we flagged it as such is because it's taking an unexpected amount of both block time. And you can see time series graph where you have this big blip here, and you can hover over it to see what's the percentage increase. You can also get the SNS notifications when you have such anomalies. And as I mentioned earlier, you can give us a thumbs up or thumbs down if you, which kind of reinforces the algorithm to know, okay, well, yeah, thumbs up, definitely this is a problem, or you might want to reconsider this. I don't agree with that. And it's not something that you have to do, but if you do it, it's just going to teach the machine learning algorithms faster. So that's, yeah.
Well, so I was going to say, with a graph like this and the concept of an anomaly, and I see a percentage on that screen, this makes me think a lot about, let's say, monitoring the average percent CPU utilization on my cluster, but that's quite different from what CodeGuru Profiler is doing here, right? What we're seeing is that the Java util zip file get entry method, I suppose, or whatever it's called here in Java, is using an unexpectedly high amount of CPU utilization, which is measuring something entirely more granular. Like, the expectation here is that this one line of code, obviously we may implement the change, but it should not have extremely variable amount of percent performance time or relative percent utilization time, right?
Yeah, you bring a very good point here, and I would like to take a step back. So yes, there are absolutely many anomaly detection services that look for anomalies. And however, what CodeGuru Profiler does, it goes really deep into the runtime data of your application, going down to this line of code or a method name to tell you, well, you know what, something is wrong with this one, you need to watch over this one. It's really important to understand that when higher order metrics or higher level metric like CPU utilization, there's a spike, I mean, it's already too late. Whereas what we've observed with CodeGuru Profiler is that it's a very sensitive anomaly detection, because it finds these subtle changes in your application at the method level, and oftentimes this happens well before the problem has developed into a full-blown incident. So this gives you this extra time to notice that something is going off, look into it and fix it before you pay the big price.
Yeah, and something like this, an anomaly like this, would be causal towards your cluster or your infrastructure you're having higher utilization. So when you're actually trying to get to or performing a root cause analysis, CodeGuru Profiler gets us much closer to resolution here than just understanding. And obviously they both exist in different parts of the pipeline and for different reasons. But this is just another level deeper than users have been able to access previously.
Yep. Okay. So going down the list, so I mentioned there's two parts to the recommendation reports. One is the anomalies, and the other one are performance issues. So the performance issues are related to really expensive lines of code. Those are inefficient use of in this case, Java. They point to issues with your code for which there is a better way to write this code. Let's look at the anatomy of a recommendation. So I'll just go all the way to the bottom. Repeated Jackson object mapper creation. So this is a typical type of a performance issue. You have an expensive object that you repeatedly create. And as you can see in this case, we show you the impact of this performance issue on your CPU, on your active CPU, which 10%, it's quite significant. And we show you, remember, new feature, the cost of that feature, or sorry, the cost of that issue, close to $3,000 a year. And we give you an explanation of, hey, this is what's happening. So Jackson Object Mapper is thread safe, and you should create it only once. And then we have suggested resolution steps. Also, if you want to see it in the visualizations, we have links for that. So I haven't spoken about visualizations. If we have time only, we'll briefly cover it. But this is basically your recommendation report, and the anomaly part of the recommendation report is fairly sensitive, so it gets updated every 5 minutes. In every one of those reports, hourly reports, you get updates every 5 minutes. Okay, cool. So
just real quick, I just want to connect this to one of the questions that came across in chat. This does demonstrate the fact that this doesn't profile just your own code, right? As you can see here in the Java util zip folder, this is utility, this is utility package. Some of the other examples you have here. So hopefully that answers the question in chat.
That is absolutely true. And I can give you an example with, we had an application that was using a library, the default Java crypto library, which was causing performance issues. So that's not your code, it's just your code using another library, but it was impacting negatively the performance of your application, and the recommendation report found out about this issue, and it recommended that you change to another library, which in this case is the open source Amazon Crypto Corretto library, which had dramatic improvements on the performance of that application. So yeah, we look at the entire application, and we tell you recommendations that could be any part of the code. With the visualizations, which I would like to go briefly into, you can see your code and other code. So my code, your code, other code.
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay. So let me see if I already opened it. Right. So what you see here, this city skyline almost is a it's called a plane graph, and it's sort of becoming a standard representation of the stack traces, the aggregated stack traces of what your application is doing for a given period of time. You can see upright that given period of time, which is, I believe it's a day here. What you see here on the horizontal axis is always methods arranged alphabetically that you're calling, and on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you see the relationship between this parent and child method. So at the bottom you have your main function that's calling another child, and all the way up to the top. And the interesting thing about the visualization is that you can very quickly see what takes a lot of CPU. The reason why is because the width of all these horizontal bars, which are called frames, i.e. the methods, that tells you how much time it takes from the CPU, or the walk log time, depending on what time you're looking at. So if you hover over any one of those, you can see things like the name of the method, class and method name, the percentage that it takes from active CPU time or walk log time. In this particular case, this is 17.28%. You can see how much it costs you per year, so that it gives you an idea of how expensive your code is. I did mention time a lot, so we're going to go very briefly into this. But what I wanted to mention is that we look at the data in 2 different ways, well, actually 3 different ways. So this is we call it the overview view of your profile, which is looking at the key entry points into your application. So it's in order of so the key operations is something that is logical to you. You know what are the main services that are, or the main operations that are executed. But also, if you want to know the nuts and bolts of your application, you're going to switch to the Hotspot View, which tells you what are my most expensive, as in the lines of code that take the most amount of time. And you find them at the top here. So as you can see, right below the main function, you have zip file.getEntry, which takes a little over 30% of your CPU time. And then you can see all the parents that it's calling. And then we have another view. I'm not going to show you here, but if you want to see a specific method and all the parents that are calling it and all the children that it's calling, you can, okay, I'm going to show it to you because it's right here. So you see, parents, children, so all the occurrences of this method throughout your profile are observed here. Going back to time, we have the concept of CPU time or active CPU time and latency. So if you're working on a latency issue, you're going to be switching to the latency view, which looks at the wall clock time. This means that even if you're not CPU bound, your application might still be slow. Reasons for this, I mean, there could be many reasons, but one of them is could be that your application or a method is blocked or waiting for something. So when you switch to this view, you have this legend here that shows you the color-coded thread states. So if everything is red, it's great because red is runnable, so it's fine. I mean, it's not fine because if you're spending too much time in runnable and have this element of surprise, hey, why am I spending so much time? That could be an issue. But the other things to look for are this blue color, which is blocked. You definitely don't want to be blocked. Or the green color, you're waiting for something. You want to look into this to see why this is happening. And if you switch to, again, the CPU view, you're going to see that it looks different because we're not showing you this extra time when your application is not doing anything on the CPU and yet it's taking time. Cool. So these are the visualizations. And I want to point out that both recommendation reports and visualizations are really important. The recommendation reports are this low-hanging fruit, which is really easy to see and fix. And the visualizations they give you all everything that you want to know about your application. They're searchable, by the way. You can search for a frame and yeah, I don't have time for this, but they're very powerful. And if you know your application, you're the best judge of where you're supposed to be spending this time. And if you're not, you want to find out why.
Yeah, I mean, even just the visualization alone, I think, just packs so much value into what is essentially one, I don't want to use the word like single pane of glass, because I think there's other connotations that are more apt for that, but essentially just being able to understand the complex behavior of such a system in sort of one view is extremely powerful. I mean, if nothing else, helps you to prioritize where you are looking in your code base to potentially even make improvements, nonetheless understanding whether some of those are blocked or not blocked. So there's just so many different layers of value that are sort of packed in here in those visualizations. And I know in chat people like Nacho Pants and I think it's SS Tam, like we have a lot of people who are really enjoying these graphs. These look pretty familiar. I think if I'm not mistaken, these were popularized actually by Netflix, flame graphs. For monitoring and observability. So it's really cool to see those, A, becoming more widely used, but B, seeing all of the features and the tie-ins here directly to even dollars and cents paired to certain lines of codes due to this dependency stack. So cool stuff.
We have a question in chat from the King Phil. Is .NET Core supported / on the roadmap?
So it is not supported yet, and we would like to hear from customers who are interested in this sort of support so that we can start working on it. So voice your opinions. Yeah,
that's a great call out. We at Amazon drive roadmaps from customer feedback. We call it working backwards. There are lots of people that have been asking, when is support coming to this language or that language? If you're a customer, you have an account manager, let them know. If you don't have one of those, let us know on social media, let us know in the chat, because we're always looking to build these features out for those that are asking for it. So please.
Yeah, Daniela, when is support coming for Fortran?
Yesterday.
Now, okay, I have a even sillier question for you. What does this look like when you run the profiler on the profiler?
We actually do run the profiler on the profiler. All parts of the profiler are being profiled.
Wow. Okay, there you have it.
I feel like that's an anticlimactic answer, but people in chat were like, "Oh, I'll get you here," and then, we already covered it.
It's secret. I cannot show it to you, but we make sure that our service is running extremely well so that you guys can take the most advantage.
Yeah, it's I joke that we like to dog food our own services, and there are certain services that have really big stories here. But in addition to using CodeGuru on our actual applications here at Amazon and AWS, actually using the profiler on the profiler is probably the most meta example I could probably come up for with that. So, thank you for that.
Great. Just very quickly, and well, I won't have time to do this probably. But you were asking me, Nick, how to start the profiler. You don't need to change any code. There is a way to change code. I'll explain when you want to do that. But to start your application together with the profiling thread or profiling agent, you want to supply on the command line a Java agent with the name of the profiler Java agent. And that's it. And either you want to set up the environment variable separately on the same command line, it doesn't matter. But the point is that it's literally a single command line where that starts your application. There's no need for changing code. Having said that, if you want to start the profiler by changing the code, you can do that as well. And this would be useful for things like running Lambda. And it will be, let's see. To do that, we provide code snippets during the onboarding experience, and it's literally importing with your import statements, and starting the profiler, and then wrapping the logic of your function in the handler function of the profiler. So that is pretty much it. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. It's super easy to start the profiling.
Awesome. So in recap here, we covered a lot here in just the profiler section. But again, introduction to Amazon CodeGuru, two primary parts, sort of the passive and the active phases. The active phase here being profiler, which Daniela, you just showed us in action and gave us a very deep dive on to be able to profile your applications with no changes to your code, and just there at the end you showed us an example of what kicking off that profiling actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think we've had enough.
Awesome. Well, trust me, if I could be here all day, I would, if it wasn't for us keeping the other guests that are about to share here. Okay. But again, in the spirit of today's episode, we're doing a fewer launches but diving a little bit deeper. CodeGuru is one that is definitely befitting of that, again, with these two very different parts, but extremely valuable in their own rights. We're actually going to be right back with a second guest to cover CodeGuru Reviewer. But without further ado, Daniela, thank you again. This demo was amazing, and you were great.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Sit tight, everyone. We'll be right back. Back again, and this is a first, Rob. We've got two guests for the exact same launch, but CodeGuru, like we said before, there's a lot of different bits and pieces to it. So again, here talking to us about the second part, CodeGuru Reviewer, is Nikunj Vaidya, Senior Solutions Architect here at AWS. Nikunj, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nick and Rob, for having me.
Yeah, welcome. It's really interesting. This is, like Nick said, this is the first time we've kind of taken two different demos on the same product, but I think that it warrants it because we really have two very distinct features here. So can you give us an overview of what we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so basically I think we want to actually, I want to give you a quick overview of what CodeGuru Reviewer does. But before that, let me quickly just address what is the exact problem that CodeGuru addresses. Right? So in a nutshell, if you think of it as CodeGuru helps to automate and harden the code reviews. and catches those difficult to find defects at a very early stage of the development. So what do we mean by those difficult to find defects, right? These are the defects which are in the categories of like the race condition, the data corruption, the resource leaks, the sensitive information leak. These are the issues. Not only are they difficult to identify, but even once you identify, to really root cause the issue and to really build a fix in a very limited amount of time when the issue is happening on the production network, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So these are the issues which Code Guru helps to discover at an early stage of development. Now, if you compare it with the traditional code review systems that we have as of today, right? So first, it's very challenging and time-consuming for even most of the most experienced code reviewers, right? The SMEs who get involved in code review also, to identify the problematic code and also to ensure that no problematic code is left behind before the application is shipped to the customers. It's very difficult for an SME, not only from technical point of view, they are very technically competent, but just considering the fact that the human is involved in there are a lot of variables that the person has to balance with. Secondly, these issues, if they are not caught at an early stage, they can easily slip through the existing review mechanisms. And these review mechanisms, which are existing ones, are you can think of it as like the unit test or the manual code reviews that happen. This can potentially delay the code approval also, and kind of pretty much takes away the valuable time from the SME who are engaged into doing some high value tasks in doing the code reviews for every commits that are coming in, right? And as you can imagine, in a release process, as the release, we come near to the timeline or the deadline of the release, the rate of the commits keeps increasing. And that pretty much pulls in the SMEs, and they are kind of pretty much engaged doing the code reviews at a high rate, whereas their value addition could be at building out futuristic technology or the value addition that they are doing for the company. So in a way, what happens is the other aspect of it, right, is most of the human code reviews are focused on the business logic, very less on the functional correctness. And this is where Code Guru complements the human code reviews and offloads those human code reviews from, let them focus on the business logic. And the functional correctness checking is carried out by Code Guru by not only checking it out, but also providing the actionable recommendations to really address and fix those lines of code which are at risk.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of just a very short overview that I wanted to kind of give you.
Yeah, and I want to sort of, reiterate one of the points that you made, which is that the emphasis of existing code reviews, while in an ideal world would be to make sure our code is optimal in every way, it largely becomes focused on, is our code doing what we want it to do? And then not necessarily an afterthought, but all on the while we'll be trying to assess, like, is it doing it in a performant fashion? But oftentimes that's limited, even for very experienced engineers, to be able to assess the true effectiveness of the code to accomplish that. And Rob joked before, we're not compilers. That's not the best use of our own brains and our own abilities. So to my understanding here, Code Guru Reviewer is a sect or a set of features within Code Guru that enable us and customers and developers to be able to actually have that automated introspection of code for its functional or operational effectiveness. Is that correct?
Exactly. So if you think of it as just from the developer workflow perspective, when the developer has built this code and pushes the code onto the code repository, that is the time when the developer would generate a pull request and kind of initiate the code review process. When we configure Code Guru is just listening to those pull request notifications. So as soon as a particular repo is associated and you generate a pull request notification, the notification goes to the Code Guru reviewer. This is the time when either the human get involved in doing the review for the business logic, and the Code Guru reviewer focuses on the functional correctness of it.
Now, Nikunj, I don't know if we have a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here, right? Because if we say that engineers are limited in what they can accomplish in code reviews, we've heard that Code Guru is powered by machine learning, and for folks that have been around the block of machine learning, they know that there's a training phase that's often involved, right? So if Code Guru Reviewer is going to be able to surface these inefficiencies in our code, what has that been trained on, right? We clearly need a training set there.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. In fact, Code Guru is actually powered by the machine learning models that are trained with millions of code reviews that have been conducted within internal to Amazon, as well as on the open source projects. So you can think of it as like the decades of learning experience and decades of knowledge and expertise that we have within the Amazon is kind of poured into these machine learning models and now are kind of made available to all of our customers to be leveraged.
Awesome. So yeah, just essentially, not just automating code reviews in a way that are quicker with the same level of quality that can already exist, but just to a extent of experience and a breadth of experience with millions of code reviews of data that any one individual engineer may never be able to amass in sort of their lifetime.
Exactly. And that's where I think that's the beauty of automation that comes into picture. In fact, not only from the aspect of the number of the amount of learning that has happened, but think of it as various different segments of expertise that you need to do a code review. There are a lot of different functional expertise that you need, and you would need potentially, in realistic case, multiple SMEs kind of function looking at the code and reviewing the code. What Code Guru offers is, and I will share my screen at some point of time to show you the various different categories of issues that Code Guru focuses on and helps you to uncover it at an early stage of a development cycle.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. Like you said, there's different levels of expertise to understand the different downstream impacts of code. And I think there's no better testament to this than the demo we just saw with Daniela, right? Profiling your application as it's actually running in either your test or your integration environment is another step downstream from actually authoring the code and merging those PRs into your code base. And so if you can catch that higher upstream, you don't even need to, or you're reducing the cost of catching that bug down the line. And this has been a recurring theme we've found here. The earlier you catch a bug, not just in its existence in your live application or your live environment, but in the development process sort of wholesale, you are saving yourself dollars, cents, and developer cycles.
Absolutely. I think the ROI is very high, considering the fact that you would have already a profiler which is doing the runtime execution performance evaluation, and you have a Code Guru reviewer which is doing static code analysis. You would have a kind of a feedback loop also between these two different functionalities, right? There are recommendations that could be recommended by the profiler, and you would go through the same cycle of implementing that code and really running it and integrating the part of the code in your main base.
Based on your description so far, it sounds like the workflow is, I build a feature, I submit a pull request, and then Code Guru is going to run automatically and start leaving comments and saying, hey, look, in this line, in this file, there's this potential problem, right? What are the integrations? What kinds of repositories does this work with?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So as of today, Code Guru Reviewer is associated with supports the Bitbucket repositories. It supports the GitHub Enterprise-based repositories. You could say the public GitHub as well as the GitHub Enterprise. And GitHub Enterprise itself is also GitHub Enterprise Cloud and GitHub Enterprise Server, which are kind of self-hosted server. And of course, AWS code commit based code repositories too.
So I actually have a follow-up question to that, and it's one that I saw in chat as well, so I don't want to claim all the credit for this, but whenever we're as developers integrating another tool or a third-party API that requires access to something like my code base on GitHub, that can be a very scary proposition, right? We always want to make sure that we're only giving a tool the amount of privileges it needs. Principle of least permissions, we understand that for IAM. What sort of permissions does Code Guru Reviewer need to actually perform this analysis on my code base?
No, in fact, actually, I think from the Code Guru Reviewer perspective also, and I will show you in my demo also, that more from the perspective of when it is the time when you actually associate the Code Guru Reviewer to the repository. During that period of time, you are authorizing the code guru reviewer to use and use this service of pull request modification. Now, once you do that, and the channel is established, and you are able to log in into using the credentials that you use in that repository itself. Once that channel is established, all the communications that happen are encrypted, and so pretty much all the code scanning that happens and the recommendations that are generated, that are all encrypted, and the security is in place. So from the and we will walk through those steps on how we associate that specific repository with either GitHub or with any other service provider.
Awesome. Yeah, no, understanding that there's, that code is encrypted end to end as it goes to the actual reviewer service is really valuable. I guess to be a little more pointed, when we give another service or application permissions to interface with, let's say, our GitHub repo, there's nuance to the level of permissions that we can give it, right? Like, assuming you own it, you have root permissions, you can do everything, you're the owner of the bucket. For Code Guru, I would assume it wouldn't need root access to your repository. It probably only needs certain permissions. Do you have examples of what those permissions are?
Absolutely. I think it is more of more in the lines of reading the repository. I think that is the main thing, that we want to read the repository. We want to list the repositories that we have, and once you associate it with that particular repository, you're able to read that code. Then pretty much whatever operations happen, they are outside the repository. So it's within the Code Guru service itself. So that particular IAM role, which it will be using to access those repositories, will potentially be limited to reading the repository.
Awesome. Well, I know we'll get into a demo in just a little bit, but I guess you've sold me on the value of automated ML powered code review. But when we're talking about the broader space of detecting bugs, I know we saw sort of the more active phase with Profiler before. How is Reviewer playing in sort of this broader ecosystem of bug detection tools?
Yeah, no. So I think from Code Guru Reviewer perspective, what it focuses on, and that is, I think, the main key value that it brings is it focuses on difficult to find defects. Those are the ones which are found at an early stage. We are not talking about the syntax error checking or the style checking, right? Those are mostly covered at an early stage of development by the IDEs itself. The developer builds the code in the IDE, then pushes the code into the code repository. By the time potentially unit testing is also done, the code is functional. So we are looking for very difficult to find defects that are supposed to be caught at an early stage. So what Reviewer brings in is the value addition is basically those hard to find defects is very important. Apart from that, the Reviewer, what it does is it is backed up with machine learning models. So this machine learning models is the decades of experience that I mentioned about of analyzing and finding complex patterns of defects that can be caught and not only can be identified, but even the actionable recommendations will be provided. So once the actionable recommendations are provided, those actionable recommendations pretty much provide you a snippet of the code that you can use in your code to replace the identified lines of code that is at risk, right? And not only that, but it provides you a kind of a feedback loop between Profiler and the reviewer too.
Yeah, I know Rob was joking before. He's holding out for the code writing as a service, but I guess we're just going one step closer to that with writing something and getting back what you should have written instead. Well, we'll see how far that gets, and I guess that begs the question: can we see that in action, Nikunj? Could we actually see what happens when I submit my garbage code and Code Guru Reviewer rips it apart?
Absolutely. So let me quickly share my screen. Give me just 1 minute.
Yeah. While you're getting that set up, we've been having the stream cut out a little bit on LinkedIn Live, so some people may be just joining us right now. Again, we are live here with AWS What's Next, a live show where we cover the latest launches from Amazon Web Services. We try very hard to be able to get exciting demos on here from service team members. Nikunj here is showing us a little bit about CodeGuru Reviewer. Previously, we had a demo from Daniela on CodeGuru Profiler, and coming up after this demo, we will be having a demo from AWS App2Container, A2C, an application containerization automation tool in CLI. So we're looking forward to that. But again, get your questions in chat if you're just joining us now. Live show, we will be looking for it. But Nikunj, I'm done talking. Let's get back to the demo that you're going to show us for CodeGuru Reviewer.
Absolutely. Can you see my screen well?
Yep, you're coming through. Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. So I will just minimize the other screens. Perfect. So so basically what I want to do is I want to go to the service of Amazon CodeGuru. Let me move this guy on the right side. So I'm in this starter page of Amazon CodeGuru. And on the left-hand side, you can see there is a nice classification of reviewer and profiler. These are the two different functionalities. We will go onto the dashboard first and just see from the perspective of how the CodeGuru dashboard looks like. This is an aggregation of reviewer and profiler. So you can see the profiler recommendations that I would have gotten in the past, the reviewer recommendations that I have gotten until now, the lines of code metered. Now, this is also something which is this is counting the number of lines of code that it has reviewed. And this is the metered word would indicate that these are the lines which does not include the comments or just the one curly brace in a line or so. It's basically significant lines of code in a single line. So those are the lines of code that are counted and are maintained here. And these are the number of pull requests. So as I was mentioning, when you configure CodeGuru and associate it with a particular repository, during that period of time, it will basically subscribe to the pull request notifications. And these are the pull request notifications that it would potentially get. So this is the pull request. And we will go into the reviewer. Reviewer has two parts, two screens into this. One is associated repositories, and second is the code reviews. So code reviews is nothing but my code review history that has happened in the past. And associated repositories is the place where I can associate a particular repository. And this is pretty much coming on board, right? So it is as simple as you just click on associate repository. You have 4 different options. You can select AWS code commit, GitHub. GitHub itself is of the public GitHub or the GitHub Enterprise Cloud version. And it is as simple as when you connect to GitHub, you can just click on connect to GitHub. And once you connect to GitHub, you would be basically looking at all the repository listing in your GitHub account, right? So you could do that. However, let us say if I select AWS code commit and I look into my code repository location, this is the listing of repositories that are associated with my code commit. So so if I pick up one particular repository and I associate it, so this association will take potentially around, say, maybe around 20 to 30 seconds. And during this period of time, it is subscribing to the pull request notification of that particular repository. So it takes a little while, maybe around 20, 30 seconds. And once it is associated, you can start working on it. So here it is already associated. And as I showed you that you can associate with this. Now, for the demo, I will use this particular repo, which is basically the Java code, which we will analyze it. This is hosted on the GitHub account. The application is on the GitHub. And in this particular case, I have this code on my GitHub. So if I am a developer, I have been committing this code and pushing the code into the code repository. I will go into the pull request page, and this is the place where I want to initiate a pull request, initiate a code review. And the first thing I will do is basically I will create a new pull request, and you can select from which branch to which branch you want to do the merging. So in this particular case, I'm selecting from feature 1 to master branch, and this is my code diffs, right? This is a particular piece of code which does the event. It's basically an event handler for tracking the shipments. So once I do that, I click create pull request, and once I click on create the pull request, me as a developer, I can just sit on the screen and wait for a little while until I get the recommendations from Code Guru. And it takes approximately around, I would say, maybe around 5-10 minutes in this particular case, this particular application that we are running. And if we go out here on Code Guru side, on the Code Guru dashboard panel, you can see the number of pull requests has increased from 7 to 8. So it has gotten the pull request notification. And now if you go into code reviews, here you can see that I have one more entry which is showing in the pending state. And this is right now, the churning is happening. The code is scanned, it is being run over the machine learning models, and the recommendations will soon be generated based upon this. So this takes around a few minutes, and it will give me the output for this. Just for the time's sake, what I can do is I can show you one of the pull requests that I've done in the past, just to show you the types of issues that it will catch and it will flag, right? So if you see from here, these are the various different recommendations that you would get. There are approximately around, there are 5 recommendations that were given by Amazon Code Guru. So think of it as, if I'm a developer, I'm sitting out here, I've submitted a pull request, pretty much on the same page, I'm getting all the recommendations back. And from here, I can see that it has identified this piece of code, and it has identified that I'm using the list objects, right? So list objects is a API which is now deprecated and it's outdated. It is recommending to use list objects v2. So in fact, it provides you with a link to that API. And here you can see there are all the details about that particular API on how you use it. Here you can see the list objects is a deprecated API, and now it's replaced with v2. So you have all the details that are needed. Apart from that, the second part it found was it is finding certain pieces of code which has the thread concurrency risk. What that means by what it means by that out here is, here we are doing a simple get command for a particular entry, for a particular entry in the hash map, and we are trying to read the value out of it. Based upon that, if we don't get anything, we will create a new value and we'll try to put in a new object in there. And that new object is being done using the put. Now, what happens is, if you have multiple threads that could be running concurrently, by the time one thread is looking at this, and it moves to the next one, the other thread may have created an object already, and the original thread might be trying to create an object when the object is already there. So it might either overwrite it, or it might go into some kind of an error condition. And that is the risk that it has identified. And so what it does is, it even provides the recommendation that rather than using put, can you use put if absent? So that way, even if the other thread has created it, your code will handle that situation, and you will not face an issue. So the things that I find it very cool out here when I start running into this is, there are some good examples that are given with all the recommendations, right? So if you go out here, you will see a particular code, how it is using this put if absent in its existing code. So that's the cool part about it, where it is providing all that information.
Yeah. One thing I was just going to point out, if we go back to the comments that we were just looking at, there's a lot of ways when we think about the way of improving static code reviews in some sort of automated fashion. There's a lot of greenfield in how we can do that. And I think the thing that's most exciting here to me is that this identifies the code block. It is going to describe to you what the problem is fundamentally with that code block. It will provide a proposed fix too, because just knowing the problem doesn't mean that you have arrived at a or an optimal type of fix. And then to actually see an example of that in you just linked what looks like the source code to like Hadoop, to give someone sort of the peace of mind of, okay, well, this is actually an example of how this is implemented in the wild. Like, that really just sort of strings together the entirety of what I would want in a code review process here.
Absolutely. And it's very clear, exactly like you mentioned. It describes the problem, it provides you fix, and it provides you with more information, including with an example. And this is what we call it as actionable recommendations, that it does not necessarily just point it out, but it also provides you the fix that can be utilized. So in this particular case, it is as simple as we are instantiating S3 client on pretty much every Lambda invocation, and it would tell you that you might want to use the static initialization or use static variables so that it could be reused. So you could potentially just reuse the existing HTTP connections and not necessarily create it every time. In fact, it gives you a link of what are the best practices for working for AWS Lambda functions. This particular recommendation is more geared towards here. Say, for example, if we are listing objects from an S3, we are collecting out here. It is requesting that you are not doing a pagination check, because the output that you might get is the first page. You might need to loop through the output to just ensure that you've gotten all output and there is no other page left. So in a way, it is good to have this always caught as a practice. And this is the place where these are the places where I really feel that the automated recommendations that comes in for any pieces of line of code, it will flag it and it will let you know that. And lastly, it provides you a recommendation where in this particular case, in this code, you have created a resource, and now you're kind of waiting in a loop. And here there is a while loop, and this is the usual tendency that is taken, that we wait in a while loop until the resource is created, and we keep checking whether the resource is created or not. This may not be the best use of your CPU and memory, and that's the reason why there is this new functionality, new API, which was the waiters feature was introduced, that you could utilize that waiters API, and in fact it gives you a link for that too. So if you go in here and watch this is a full-fledged blog on how to use waiters with examples in the code. That will give you very detailed guidance on how the waiters can be used in your code.
So I'm not personally super familiar with waiters in particular, but essentially and correct me if my misunderstanding or my understanding is wrong here, but CodeGuru Reviewer can even make suggestions where there could be a more optimal asynchronous implementation as opposed to this synchronous implementation here. Is that essentially something that we're seeing?
Pretty much in that line, because waiters, you have async waiters, and you could have different types of waiters which are in polling. So you could utilize and implement it in different ways that you want, and it guides you through that different options, this particular blog. But exactly to your point is, if it sees, and it goes more towards, more from the profiler perspective also, like Daniela was showing you the visualization, and in fact, from your visualization of the code, you could potentially see what are those function blocking calls and what are the calls which are kind of waiting in a timed out mode or waiting. That gives you a kind of an idea that what are these functions which are spending much more time than required. So those performance issues are also something which is very important to be caught by the profiler. And from reviewer perspective, it will identify any optimization that you can do from the code perspective before even building out the code.
Yeah, this sort of starts to come full circle to some of the stuff that Rob was talking about before. when you really think about what your most expensive lines of code can be, well, there's clearly some implementations that can just objectively be suboptimal, which it seems like Reviewer does a really good job of catching here. But then, you're in practice, your most expensive lines of code can be due to something that's not explicitly included in your code, which is traffic patterns and utilization and like, how your application scales up, essentially. And that's something that, Profiler, which Daniela covered before, would cover. And the idea is that Reviewer should catch some of these issues that could cause problems downstream, but we would rather catch those up here in the code integration process.
Absolutely. And in fact, to the point which that Rob covered in a very early part of the phase, where he was talking about how he was doing the string copy operation, the word that you use was very important, Nick, that subjective. And really, Code Guru really objectively finds out what are the recommendations that you should implement, because there are many other aspects, many other point of views and approaches that can be taken, and it can be pretty much subjective based upon what kind of code you are building out. And Code Guru Reviewer does a good job in looking at the code. Because what it does is when the code is scanned, right? When the pull request notification is sent, when the code is scanned, the code which is covered within that pull request is the only code which is scanned by the Code Guru. But in fact, if there are two different files, say for example they are included, those whole files are read in entirety. So it gives itself a proper context of what is the code flow looking like. And based upon that, it creates these objective recommendations and throws it out in the output.
Kanj, I've got two questions.
Sure.
One is the examples you're showing us here are fairly in depth with respect to how you use the AWS SDK, and that's very interesting. So, kind of connecting this to one of the news items that we covered at the beginning of the segment. If I start writing, let's say, a connection pool manager for RDS, and I just write this as a standalone Java package, does Code Guru have the ability to detect, hey, it looks like what you're trying to do at a conceptual level is you're writing a connection pool manager. Don't do that. Use Rds Proxy instead, right? Can it do things like that? Do you have examples like that are kind of, I'm not quite sure how to describe it exactly, but are more meta, right? It's not like this API call has a v2 is deprecated or has a v2 inline replacement. More like this pattern is not recommended, and I think you're alluding to that, but I didn't see an example here. Is that something you can talk to?
Yeah, and pretty much it goes in the line with, and I'm sharing this particular screen. This screen will actually provide you with much more detailed information exactly to answer your question. What are the different categories of issues that Code Guru Reviewer can make comments on and can detect? So what this means is there are specific detectors in Code Guru that are integrated, and these are various different detectors in various different categories which can detect these kind of issues and can make recommendations. For example, the one which you are mentioning about is AWS best practices. It has the knowledge about how the APIs are supposed to be used. And if those APIs are potentially used in a non-optimal way, or if there is a better way of using it, or maybe an incorrect way, it will point out that. So AWS best practices is just one part of it, and the other examples that we went through in the demo was more in terms of concurrency, thread concurrency, and so. But to answer your question, basically that would fall into this category of AWS best practices.
I guess.
Sorry, let me just finish this thought. But specifically, like a human reviewer, looking at that thing, they would say, well, okay, I see that you're creating several different connections to RDS. What are you doing with those connections? And then you look at the structure and you look at how they're being stored. And you're like, oh, okay, it looks like you're creating a connection pool, right? Does Code Guru have the ability to kind of take that macro level approach and realize like what you're doing is creating some sort of pool? Is that what you should be doing with respect to best practices?
So from the point of view of Code Guru Reviewer, what it does is it would read through the code and hopefully the file that is included in the pull request, right? So say, for example, usually when a developer would make a code change, there would be some level of code change that will be included in that pull request. Now, as long as that code change has proper full detailed context of, say, for example, number of connections that is that are being that will be spawned, or the number of connections that will be created, all of those information, as long as it is available for CodeGuru to review it, it will be able to make recommendations on that. So definitely it is as long as it can understand the piece of code, and it is aware of a much more optimal pattern that with which the code can be improved upon, the recommendation will be generated.
Yeah. To one quick follow up to that. So let's take another case. I think the RDS example is a bit contrived maybe, but let's say I'm writing my own Redis driver for Java, and I have a GitHub repo where I keep all of this code, and what I'm doing is constantly updating that repo, right? And I'm saying, hey, actually, this put request in this driver is being deprecated. I am deprecating this function. I am the maintainer of that library. I'm deprecating that API call in favor of the put v2. So does CodeGuru have the ability to understand that, and if so, how?
That's a good question. So I think from CodeGuru perspective, what it focuses on is the set of APIs, which are AWS APIs, which are published, and it is aware of and it has knowledge about which ones are the current one, which one are the deprecated one. And from the Java APIs perspective, for example, if there is a specific API which is purely related to Java and nothing to do from the AWS API perspective, that also it would keep track of. However, from the feedback perspective, from a user perspective, if you want to provide a feedback, the feedback that you can provide is more from the perspective of the recommendation that was generated, whether it was useful or not. So in fact, actually, in those CodeGuru reviewer comments that showed up in the on the GitHub page, you have a small icon out there. You can select whether plus or minus, depending on whether the recommendation was useful to you. So that is the kind of feedback that CodeGuru accepts from the users, from our customers, and it will provide an input into CodeGuru service, that which are the recommendations which are more useful compared to others. So as of today, it is restricted to mainly those kind of feedback that we can provide.
Rob.
Okay, let me try and reframe the question very, very slightly. So what we saw was the S3, an example of an S3 API in the AWS SDK, where it says this has a V2 that you should use instead. We also saw CodeGuru commenting on the use of the concurrent hash map within the Java standard library, right? So it's clearly knows about those two things. What I'm wondering is if I include a third-party library, and that third-party library on its documentation or its GitHub repo says very clearly, this particular API call should no longer be used. It should be deprecated in favor of these two API calls. Does CodeGuru have the ability to fold that in for a third-party library?
Right. From the third-party library, I'm as far as I know, it would not be able to. But we can, because from the point of view of, say, for example, the libraries that it is aware of, right? Those are more in terms of the ones which are, say, for example, Java-based, or from the AWS APIs perspective. Those are the ones that it needs to focus on, or the detectors are built on that. Say, for example, what you're suggesting is if there is a way that we can provide an input into service, that which libraries are outdated and which ones are not, that is something that that we can consider it as something which we should be looking for if there is a demand for having that kind of a capability.
Yeah, and you know, I guess like circling back to Rob's point before about, you know, hey, AWS just launched, you know, Rds Proxy, right? When can we expect CodeGuru to implement best practices like that? In sort of the wheelhouse of how these sorts of models are trained under the hood. In order to have that as a possibility, would then need to be trained on PRs and repos that incorporate that, and the model would then be able to hopefully figure out that this is a set of behavior that is building your own connection pooling, and an advisable sort of reconciliation for that would be maybe using a managed tool like Rds Proxy. But yeah, the advisement on around new tools and like what the time frame looks like for that is an interesting question going forward. Not one that I'd imagine there's some sort of SLA on, but hopefully over time we can expect to see some of those AWS best practices incorporated at sort of the theoretical level there too.
Yeah, and apart from that, I think, as I was mentioned, I think from the examples that were covered, mostly this is the one which is also very important, which is the sensitive information leak. This is basically a very important aspect of it, where any kind of an sensitive information, not only from the code perspective, but say, for example, any logs or any exceptions that are thrown out, it wants to ensure that none of the sensitive information is leaked out in there. So there is a good amount of detectors built on that also. But recently also we have introduced the input validation. This is something also very important as a detector, that if you are not doing input validation, you have more risk for the code to really inject either some malicious attack or some kind of an unintentional service component changes or so that could impact your application well-being. So in a way, these are various different types of detectors that are integrated within CodeGuru, and it will provide the actionable recommendations based upon these.
Awesome. Well, we're creeping up on almost 2 hours here on CodeGuru, which is awesome. There's been so much to talk about, and I guess some people joined us later on, but to sort of recap what we've covered again, CodeGuru, sort of this, I guess, in my own words, this like Swiss Army knife to help improve and cut out many of the problems that exist in the software authoring and testing and profiling sort of life cycle. And we saw sort of these two main aspects, sort of the more passive side here with reviewer that can assess your PRs and your code sort of as is for explicit issues or use of bad practices. And then previously we had Daniela talk to us a little bit about Profiler and show us how you can ascertain more insights into the operational inefficiencies or the finding the most expensive lines of code based on your application running with its expected traffic patterns. So truly a very wide breadth of feature sets and sort of surface area for what CodeGuru can cover here.
Well, and I think more importantly, the framework and the way of operating that is put in place here immediately implies that this is something that's going to continue to improve, right? The fact that you have a model that is driving these things, the fact that you were able to show us a slide that's like, these are the factors that we can make recommendations based on today, that immediately tells me that, of course, you're going to add more in the future based on customer feedback.
Absolutely. I think as you go further, I think there is a lot of requests to be that we are getting for support for various different languages. So if there are such demands, please provide us more information about it so that we can prioritize the feature support for that.
Awesome. And this is one thing we always like to talk a little bit about, especially now that the service is GA. A lot of customers have been able to get their hands on this in the preview phase of it. And I have a little bit of a list here. We see that for Profiler, customers like Atlassian, Eagle Dream, and YouCanBook.me are using that to better understand and reduce their costs of their applications in production. And then I see here DevFactory and Renga active users of the CodeGuru Reviewer. So always excited to have these launch partners that work and get hands-on with the service and get to see that value themselves. So very happy to see that. And the golden question that I think a lot of people have been wondering, in addition, the second most popular question after when is this coming to the language that I like the most, but how can I get started with CodeGuru? I believe that there is a set of demo applications that are out there, and from a cost perspective, I believe CodeGuru is free for up to 90 days to use. Is that true?
That is true.
Awesome.
That is absolutely, yeah.
Great. Well, we have some more info being dropped in the chat there for CodeGuru's product page. We also have a sample repository that actually covers the exact demo that Nikunj showed us today. We'll get that link dropped in chat as well. But without further ado, Nikunj, thank you for joining us again. First time we've had 2 guests on to cover, one launch, but I think it really warranted it. Reviewer and profiler, 2 very different value propositions, but I think they all bubble up to solving problems in software development, and that's something that affects anyone that works in that space. So very excited to have gotten to show this. Nikunj, again, thank you for joining us. We will be right back. We're going to take a very, very quick break, and then we have our final demo of the day, which is going to be AWS App2Container. So sit tight. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Last demo, last session of the day, but by no means the least important. We have a very exciting launch today, talking a little bit about AWS App2Container. I won't sort of spill the beans on what it does just yet, but to tell us a little bit more about it, the expert in the room here, Prakash Aradhya, lead product manager on application modernization here at AWS, joining us to talk about this very exciting launch. So Prakash, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me here.
Okay.
Welcome.
So we're talking App2Container. I think there's a lot of sort of foundation laying we're going to want to do here to sort of give the lay of the land. And we can start, very, very, very far upstream here. We're talking about modernizing applications. That can mean a lot of different things. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But especially we're talking about the move to the cloud, this takes some very particular technical meanings. We think of things like containerization, which I think is sort of intuitive in this conversation. We think of things maybe like, moving a monolith to microservices and so on. There's a lot of different things here. I know that App2Container primarily deals with Java and .NET applications, so why don't we start there? What are the roadblocks with respect to modernizing Java and .NET applications?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nick. The modernization could mean many things to many people. Sometimes people think modernization could be like something like, you're bringing from a 50-year-old application to the today's world, right? That's not really what it means. We've been through the software development cycle over the years. We're probably talking about applications that were created like 8 to 10 years ago. There are so many applications, the development cycle, the whole the development process of applications has changed so much over the years. Things that were created like 8 to 10 years ago are not really, they're still usable. They're still business, like the logic is being run and the business, the enterprise is running business around it. but I think they're not meant for today's way of developing applications and releasing application, right? So like you mentioned, like the applications could be a big monolithic application. Like it's not really agile enough. It may take like 3-4 months to make any changes to the code and redeploy and all the stuff. So in today's world, I mean, the businesses cannot wait that long. They need to make a change today and deploy the change in like in 2 hours, right? I mean, that's a level of agility that the businesses have to react to the changing market conditions, the competition, all kinds of stuff. So the agility is the most paramount important thing in the modernization. With all those applications sitting out there, it's not possible, right? So when enterprises think about modernization, there are multiple ways they can do this, right? It could be like they have these applications. They want to take advantage of the modern infrastructure, like the new CI/CD management and monitoring of these applications. They can just take it, push it into the cloud, like a whole migration of the VMs. It's like a rehosting application, right? That's one of the ways. I mean, there are many ways you could do it. One of the ways it could be like you're refactoring the code, like some of the code that you have. For instance, like .NET, right? Microsoft stopped supporting .NET, so it's kind of a unsupported thing suddenly, right? So now there are like millions of applications that are sitting on .NET. So those applications needs to continue to be supported by customers, and they need to need to find a newer platform, newer world. Maybe there's an opportunity to kind of refactor some of this code and continue to evolve that code. So if you own the code and like if it's a custom application, it makes perfect sense. So you have developed the code and you have the code in house. You can do some refactoring, and after refactoring, you can re-platform it to the cloud environment. So that's an option you have. In some situations, the enterprise customers have bought some the commercial out of the shelf applications. Some of those applications you don't have anything, you don't have the code, and it's just been sitting there for 10+ years, but you still have a dependency on those applications in your business. Those applications, you probably just want to take advantage of the modern architecture. You want to just move to the cloud, containerize it, and move to the cloud. So that's like re-platforming. So there are a lot of options customers have when it comes to modernization. So with that, I think we recognized there's an opportunity, and we launched 2 new set of tools last week. One is called Portability Assistance for .NET applications, which really helps customers to kind of take their .NET applications and provide them the ability to look at the compatibility for the .NET Core, which is a more open source and more evolving platform. So they can, as a customer, you can reduce the cost of deployment, the cost of running the applications, and kind of modernizing the application to the newer mode, that kind of stuff. Similarly, and in addition to the porting assistant, we also launched the App2Container, which is the topic of today. So where we can help customers to take their applications, containerize it, and deploy to the AWS.
So, lot to unpack here, right? To paraphrase some of what you said, essentially, when I gave you this sort of broad breadth of modernization means a lot of things, you just went through it and named a large number of them. Refactoring, modernization can mean everything from refactoring your code to general architecture to deployment infrastructure and so on and so forth. So what's exciting about today's session, we're talking a little bit about App2Container, but there was also this other launch, similarly the .NET Portability Assistant tool or Compatibility Assistant tool. So cool. You touched a lot on containerization, but I think that's sort of, as the name implies, what we're going to dive a bit deeper on in this talk. I'm familiar with containerization. I know many of our customers may be, but I think it's also important to sort of reestablish this baseline of why containerization is important. Docker got very famous on the idea of building once and deploying anywhere as sort of the flagship mantra of containerization. But it's clearly more than just the ease of use of deploying software, right? There's a lot of downstream features that are enabled once you've sort of bought into this containerization framework. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Prakash. What are the biggest values that customers find when they containerize their applications?
Right. I think that's a great point. I mean, you alluded to many of the benefits of containerization, like the agility and the portability. So you build once, runs anywhere. I mean, it's not something that new that we are hearing today, right? Like if you roll back 20+ years ago, like Java, the whole premise of Java was like to be able to build an application run anywhere. In today's world, in the modern world, it's like, it's containers, right? Everything fully packaged, and there's nobody can complain about, oh, you missed one dependency, you missed one library. So now you like, okay, complete package that I know that it works and it is tested, and you just have to open it and run it, and it should work. So developers don't have time to go and debug a lot of those things. They want to be able to focus on the business logic. They want to kind of continue to quickly take advantage of the infrastructure to kind of help you take care of all the plumbing and all this logistics. So those are the benefits, like where people want to containerize it, which is fantastic. But now the enterprises have a kind of a mixed situation, right? I mean, pretty much everybody, I think I know there are some data points, like about 90 plus customers, enterprises today, they are looking at creating all new applications in containerized space, right? So that's great. So now you're adopting a new methodology of creating applications in a containerized world, but at the same time, you have all these applications that are sitting there for years, kind of using a different kind of system, like now the managing of those applications, the whole CI/CD process, the whole the management aspects. So now, as an enterprise, you need to deal with two different kind of systems. You need to hire people who can do both kinds of systems. There is no, and at the same times, you may not even have people who knows the legacy systems. So it becomes very challenging. So now customers like to streamline and have one set of tools to work for both sets of applications, and they're kind of looking for ways to kind of manage those and streamline their whole operations, cut cost, and become efficient, and kind of have one way to manage their applications. So that's where I think the containerization of the existing applications, whether it's Java applications or .NET applications, like millions and millions of applications that are there, without throwing them away or rewriting the whole thing from the scratch, the customers are looking for like a seamless way to move to the modern world.
That's where I think we should talk about or get a little bit more specific. Like you said, there's lots and lots of existing .NET applications that might run on premise. They've built up over time. They've been running for years, and the .NET framework is lots of different things, right? Just to be 100% clear, what we're talking about here are ASP.NET applications running on IIS. Is that right?
For the containerization part, yes, you're absolutely right. What we are supporting the containerization is like an ASP.NET application running in the IIS server. We can take that, containerize it, and move to the cloud. But the other tool that we talked about, portability assistance, can help you, refactor those .NET applications to, .NET Core based applications.
Right. And just to kind of add a little bit of context to that, because I know we had questions about .NET from people in the chat earlier. When we say ASP.NET applications on IIS, let's also try and give a sense of the negative space. What is this not? So for instance, this is not going to help you port a WPF application. That, if you think about that, doesn't even make sense, because that is something that can only run on a Windows client anyway, right? And that is also full .NET that has no equivalent in .NET Core, so containerizing it makes no sense, right? So when we say .NET, I think we in order to kind of get ahead of any confusion, what we're really talking about is a certain kind of .NET application that runs as a service that sits there and accepts, HTTP or TCP requests. The one that you're talking about here, the tool, you can run on any .NET application, but the converter itself, what that's doing is containerizing the ASP.NET application that is running within IIS. Is that fair?
True. Absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Well, definitely some useful context on sort of the space of which App2Container is the types of applications App2Container is going to be working with here. But understanding the benefits of containerization are great. But as easy of a developer experience as they introduce for things like reproducible deployments and CI/CD downstream, the question of how you actually containerize the application or how you arrive at that containerized pipeline is still one that a lot of folks need to grapple with. And when we talk about costs of building a pipeline or learning how to do something in a different way, the educational costs of actually learning containerization and Docker and these underlying technologies is non-trivial. So when we're thinking about problems with actually moving to containers or containerized architecture, what are the actual steps or problems that prevent people from doing so currently?
Right. So I think we talked about the benefits. It's great. I think it makes total sense for enterprises to kind of to do the actual containerization. But the process itself is a multi-step process, right? It's not just like, you run something and it just containerize it, throw it away. I think the process is like, it requires understanding the application itself. Whether it's a, if it's a cards application or a custom application, like the kind of dependencies it has for all the different kind of libraries, the third-party libraries, whatever dependencies it has, understanding all the different dependencies, going through the profiling the code and understanding all, even the network dependencies, the ports that they're running. So it's quite a lot of work to understand the application itself. So once you understand the application, and then it's a process of creating the Docker artifacts. It's a lot of manual work. You need to write the Docker file, and kind of trying to translate all those dependencies and the network dependencies into the Docker file and figure out how the Docker should look like. So the skill set and the knowledge you need to understand how the cloud environment works is quite extensive. I mean, not everybody comes with that skill set. Very limited resources within the enterprise who knows those stuff to do. And then once you create the Docker file and creating the Docker image, and then figuring out how to deploy this into the container platform, taking advantage of all the the load balancing and the VPC, all of the stuff. It's a multiple stages, but it is quite a lot of work and the skill set needed. So it is it's just a big effort.
Awesome. I guess some examples that I've seen, like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, and that's I think that's a commonality, and there's no reason to shy away from that, right? Like those costs can have a positive ROI downstream with containerization. But when we're talking about doing this, let's say on AWS, there's a few assets that are very much necessary for this to be possible. I mean, the most foundational one is the Docker file, that's necessary for the application itself. But then things like if you're going to run on EC2, you need task definitions. You need to handle your networking. You mentioned ports before, right? These are all things that even separate from containerization, if we're talking about modernization moving to the cloud, are table stakes essentially, or necessary for doing this in an effective way. At least for Java and .NET applications. There's different ways to containerize applications on things like ECS and so on and so forth, right? But App2Container needs to help with these to be able to make that effective, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's exactly the reason why we recognize customers are wanting to do this. They want to take advantage of the cloud world. So that's great. I mean, we do see that the amount of effort is involved is quite extensive. So that's why we conceived this idea of App2Container, and we created this and we launched it. And we've been working with a lot of our customers, understanding their pain points and where we can really create value in this tool. So the App2Container tool makes it really, really easy for you. Pretty much, I can show you when I show you the demo. You can see an application running in your local server, and the application completely moved, containerized, and moved to the cloud without touching the code, without going through using a lot of the default things. Right now, of course, it's it's a happy path for normal things, but there are opportunities where you could you could optimize it for a better performance in the cloud, right? So this is good. So yes, App2Container, it will do the complete analysis of your application. It provides you a list of applications. Okay, here are all the applications that are currently running in your environment. You can analyze an application, and it will create the Docker image, Docker file, and it will create the task definitions or the YAML file if you want to move to EKS. And then it will also provide you the cloud pipelines, and you can seamlessly integrate with the CI/CD pipeline within the AWS or your own favorite CI/CD environment that you have. So it makes it really seamless and easy for you to kind of take on the modernization effort with very limited knowledge.
So I feel like I have a very coarse understanding of the problems and the solutions that App2Container solves, but I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about how this is working. What is the experience as a user? Because I understand up here, upstream, I have, let's say my .NET or Java application. And then downstream here, I have, ideally on the happy path, some containerized workload that's now running with all the necessary networking and bells and whistles that are required to do so on AWS. But what is the actual process by which we go from over here, start to finish? How do I use App2Container?
So it's pretty simple. We are GA. The product is available on our product pages, and you just go download the tool to your local machine wherever your application is running, or in the production server, or the staging server. We generally recommend staging server. We have multiple modes that we can support. So technically, you download it, install it on the local machine, and then you kind of initialize it. You connect that the CLI. It's a command line tool, so you connect that to configure that to your AWS account. It's not mandatory, but if you want to kind of eventually deploy it, you need to connect to the AWS account. So once you configure it, so it's just a series of commands that I'm going to show in a little bit. A series of commands. First, you'll do show me the inventory of applications, all the applications that are currently running in my server. So it will go through, go through the server, and it will dig up, and it'll find out, okay, here are the applications that are currently running in your environment. They are eligible to be containerized. That's great. So now I want to understand a particular application that I want to containerize. I pick up that application and say, give me an analysis of this application. It runs through the analysis, and it comes back with, okay, here is a big list of things that I found, and these are the dependencies that you have. These are codes and all this stuff. And once that is done, then you say, okay, now I understand things. If I want to, as a user, if I want to make some modifications, I can make it, or I can just use the default. And then I say, okay, now give me a containerized application. So use whatever the base image that you have. Depending on if you're using the .NET applications, you can use base image of Windows 2012 or 16, then for Java you can use the Linux or Ubuntu, any of those base images. And then the application is containerized, and it will give you a complete application. Then you can ask for, okay, I want to now do the deployment, create all the deployment artifacts. Give me the task definitions. It will give you the YAML file if you want to go to the EKS. All of those artifacts are generated for you, and now you can go look at those artifacts and see if they're all good. And then you say, okay, just deploy this to my ECS instance, right? So it's just step by step, like the way the workflow that you want to walk through, it kind of takes it and put it into the your ECS account seamlessly without much effort.
So to be as clear as possible, or as succinct as possible, because you threw in a lot of additional context. In addition, I guess we sort of merged the developer experience as well as what is happening under the hood. So let's sort of decouple those for brevity's sake. Essentially, this is App2Container is a CLI. It's open and available. You can download it, install it wherever you so desire. You then run this CLI on the infrastructure that is running the application that you're looking to containerize. The result of that CLI command is ultimately going to return a set of applications that it detects running on that infrastructure, of which we discussed some of the valid ones that it can containerize before, like ASP.NET IIS web applications, Apache Tomcat, JBoss, and some other Java.NET web applications that are being assessed. And then once you as the user select one of those through the CLI, it will then generate these artifacts and essentially be like a CLI wizard for automating the generation of these assets automatically by scanning. And one of the interesting things that you touched on that I'm actually going to pass it over to Rob to talk about a little bit is auto detection of things like dependencies, right? So every language has their own package managers and their ways of understanding this. But something that's really interesting to me is that, and maybe I'm misspeaking here, but this is essentially a running application that you can run and detect this and actually ascertain what all of the dependencies are during runtime, which is more than just assessing a static repository and reading what's in my requirements.txt in Python, right? I'm not as familiar with .NET. What are some of the challenges of actually understanding all of these all of these dependencies?
So if you're doing it manually, you probably going and looking at the scripts and understanding all the dependencies that it has, and getting a complete list of that is quite a lot of work. Some of the times the skill set required by the developers, some of these applications could be really, really old, right? So today's developers probably don't have much context. So that's where the challenge really lies, being able to capture when you're doing something manually, understanding all the dependencies. So that's the burden this App2Container kind of takes that off from you as a developer. So it will do that work for you. And again, it's not like it's not an extensive thing. It's there may be some instances. I mean, based on the application that is currently running, it can pick up all the dependencies what it knows, but there could be some application dependencies that may not be discoverable by the tool. So if you're an expert user, you probably know, okay, there's some dependencies missing. You could, we recommend customers, like once you create the containerized app, we recommend customers to do a lot of local testing of the containerized image before you move that into production. So during that time, whatever the testing methodology that you're using with all your testing, so when you run through those tests to make sure there's no dependency that is missing in the application that is containerized.
Yeah, and just kind of make that crisp by way of example. I think well, I'll give you an example. You tell me if this is what you're talking about. But one of the common use cases when you integrate an ASP.NET application with IIS is to use integrated AD authentication, right?
Right.
And then, but as far as the .NET app is concerned, that authentication flow is kind of magic. It's kind of environment based, and so when we containerize that application, we're really just containerizing the logic, that unit that is running within IIS.
Right.
And that we can't really containerize. I mean, this would be an intractable problem for any sort of automation, but we can't containerize AD, right? We can't go and scoop up that AD endpoint and then all of its backing, credentials and whatever. We have no idea how to do that. Well, we can use LDAP, but anyway, that's, just keeping the world somewhat sane for a moment. Right? Is that an example of what you're talking about? Where I think what you're saying is this does a lot, but it's not a tool that you basically put on autopilot and it does everything for you. At the end of the day, it's going to spit out a Docker file, it's going to find your ports, it's going to do some things, but ultimately at the end of the day, you as the maintainer of this service or this piece of code have to apply some level of human oversight in view to say, well, actually, we do use AD integrated auth. And that's not going to work unless we figure out how to provide that endpoint to the containerized version of this app.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the tool does the heavy lifting. It does most of the work for you. So you don't need to start from the scratch. You don't need to go build everything right now manually. So it does the heavy lifting. It gives you the framework. It gives you all the templates. So now as a user, when you run through your test, like the same test that you've been running for the application that are running locally, the same test that you want to run against this application, the containerized image. So then you catch a lot of those things that are possibly missing, and then you fix those things. So all these templates are easily editable. Like every step, like you go through the CLI process. Between each of those steps, you could when you do the analysis comes back with the whole JSON file, and you can go add stuff or remove stuff, whatever makes sense based on your testing, and then recreate the image and then go through the process. So yes, I mean it is really important. Like simple applications, it's maybe like just a simple containerization is done, like the demo that I'm gonna do, right? But in real world, there may be like some more complex dependencies that you have to manage. So you want to make sure those things are taken care of before you move to production.
Absolutely. Well, I think we need to see a demo because what you're talking about here can potentially save a lot of time, and I think everyone's wondering what it looks like to use it.
Yeah, so let me share my screen. So okay, hope you can see my screen now.
Yep.
So just a couple of quick things, and I think we touched upon this. So the App2Container, container supports like different kinds of workload. Your source could be coming from my local machine or local the on-premise server, or maybe running in a VM, or it could be in EC2, or it could be any other cloud, right? Whatever is the source, a .NET application or Java application, ASP.NET application running on IIS server, or Java application running on a Spring Boot or Tomcat or JBoss, WebSphere, WebLogic. So all those applications are supported through the App2Container. And then the App2Container can take that, and then you can create register the app in the ECR, and then work through the deploy to either ECS or EKS, and create the code pipelines and so forth. So what I'm going to show in the demo in a little bit is like basically walk through these phases, right? These are the commands that are supported in the A2C command line tool. So initialize, configure, then the inventory, create the inventory, look at the inventory, analyze, containerize, generate deployment, task definitions, and then kind of repeat through those steps. One quick thing about the split mode. I mean, there's some situation customers don't want to run the containerization tool on the production server if they don't have the staging server, right? In those kind of situations, they could use what is called split mode, where they can run the application, the inventory analyze on the machine where the application is running. Once that is done, they can do the rest of the load in a worker machine. So there, it can take that JSON file and then it can work through and containerize it and deploy it to the AWS if you chose. So those are the things you could do. So I have two applications. Let's see. I can't see mine. Okay, I have a Windows application, like an ASP.NET application, and a Java application. So maybe I'll go through this Java application. So here, what I'm doing is I'm running a Tomcat application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly check what version of Java I'm running. So it's 1.7. It's out of support. We know that it's outdated. It's not necessarily that it has to be 1.7, but it's 1.8. And I have an application running in my Tomcat server locally, which it's a Elastic Bean application. Like you're probably familiar with these, the Snake application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for what processes are currently running. I just quickly do the look for the services that are currently running. So I see that there's one service. So I'm running in the Cloud9 environment. The good thing about this Cloud9 environment, I can quickly go and preview the application that I'm running. So I just want to show the local application that I'm running in my machine to look at the application itself. So it's a Beanstalk application. You can look through the application and see, is there Snake? It's a pretty cool application if you've not seen it before. So this is a Java application. It's currently running in my local machine. So I want to take this application now containerize it and move to the cloud, right? So I go to the other shell with the root access. So first thing I need to do is to do the initialization, right? So here, I run through the init command from the App2Container. So in this init command, what it does is it configures the environment that I'm running. So I just take the default one, so the workspace directory. I'll use the local one. The AWS profile, I'm use the default one. So S3 bucket, if you are going to deploy, you need to provide the S3 bucket that you are going to be using AWS. If not, you can it will containerize it and local, put it in the local environment. So you could just use the default. So the reporting the metrics, that's great. We can do that, and then the currently not going to take the default now for the trusted thing. So the configuration is saved. So the initialization is done. The tool is ready to be used. So the first command, as we talked about earlier, so we want to do the inventory of the applications. Like, I want to see how many applications are currently running in my environment. So I only have one application, the Java Tomcat, that's saying that it is the application ID. In general, there could be multiple applications running, but today in my environment, I only have one application. So the next step I want to do is I want to be able to go deep into that application and understand the complete dependency of that application. The process we are following here, it's the same thing for the ASP.NET applications. It's just the same commands. There's no difference in what we are following through. So I take the application ID, and that's the ID that I'm using here, and run through the application. It's pretty quick. It came back quickly, and it showed, and it also shows the next steps after your. Now it says analysis is successful. Now you can do the next few steps. So the analysis.json is the file that has all the details, about the dependencies, the network dependencies, and all of the stuff. And the next command that you are going to be using is the containers command. So before that, let's take a look at what's there in the analysis.json, right? So this is a pretty detailed file that shows a lot of details about the command line, the variables that were used, and some of the the dependencies, like the libraries that are used in the for the application. So it's a pretty extensive thing, and you have an opportunity to remove and add stuff there if you choose to, if you want to exclude some files and so forth, right? So now the next thing is you want to do, first extract all those dependencies, right? So what this extract command does is it creates a tar file by picking up all those dependencies that you have for your application, right? Once that application, the tar file is created, so then it becomes easy for the containerized command to go through and create a containerized image. So one of the things that you need to do before you containerize is you need to know which base image that you want to use. So currently in my machine, I have the Amazon Linux base image. But if you choose to use something else, like a lot of enterprises are standardized on a specific image, you can always have that as an option. And now that what I'm going to do is I'm going to call, do the containerized thing, containerize the command. So it goes through, it takes a few minutes. So once that is done, so it comes back, says it's successful. Now when you look at the list of images, I can see the images that is created just a few minutes ago. So it's built on top of the Amazon Linux, and it takes the applications and puts it on top of it with the JVM, all of the stuff that is needed with all the dependencies, libraries that you asked for. It's fully containerized, and now that application is ready for the next stage. So you have a way to optimize it if you think the size is big, and you can go back and if you know certain things that should not be included in the image, you can go to JSON file and fine tune it and remove a lot of those things. So the next thing is I want to generate all the deployments, right? So I use the generate app deployment command. It goes through and generates all the deployment artifacts that are needed. So here it's a pretty quick thing. So you look at the artifacts. In the deployment file, you go and you look at the environment that you're using. I'm currently targeting the ECS. That's where I want to put, and which by default is configured like 2 CPUs and then like the memory usage. One of the things that I'm going to be looking for is like a VPC ID, so that I know that I want to push it into one of my environments. So it's something that I want to add there, the VPC ID. So the one that I have in EC2, that's the one thing that I want to configure. So once I configure, now it's ready to be deployed. So these are the deployment artifacts. So this is great. So I save this file, the deployment JSON. Now I go to the next stage, which is really the deployment. So I'll just submit, give a deploy command with the whole string. And now it's going to go through and it's taking the container, pushing it to the EC2. So now we can go to the console and see while it is trying to deploy the application. So it's going to take a few minutes because connecting to ECS and going through the whole process. Then you can go to your cloud formation in your console and you can look at the deployments that are currently going through. You'll see two in progress. One is the standalone, the other one is nested, based on the configuration that you provided. So it takes a few minutes, for it to complete. So you can see that in progress. Once it's done, it says it's done. So now you can go back to the console. Okay, now it's done. So once it is done, so you get the load balancer endpoint. So you use that endpoint. So that's where the application is now running. Remember, this is the containerized application. It's running inside EC2, inside ECS. So that's where it's the same application what you saw in my local machine earlier. Now it's fully containerized with a few steps that I went through. So now it's running in the cloud, as a same application, right? I mean, again, it's for a normal application, it's all good, but in some situations you have to go through a lot of testing before you do the thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop here. The next steps I think you can also do is you can create the cloud artifacts and the cloud deploy. So it will generate all the pipelines and it will integrate seamlessly with the AWS environment. So now you can go and seamlessly manage those things. So that's what I wanted to show. I mean, basically, So I mean, what you saw is like, the application that is like currently running on my local machine. It's the same thing for ASP.NET applications or Java applications. Go through a few steps, and then it takes it and containerizes and put it into either ECS or EKS environment seamlessly.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a lot end to end, right? But I think that if we really frame this as, what is the alternative? What is the status quo for modernizing and containerizing applications for .NET and Java? We see that that is something that would not have been able to be covered in, like a 10, 15-minute walkthrough like you described right there, right? We talked a little bit before about the roadblocks or the significant hurdles to containerizing applications. And really, if we just break it down into the handful of discrete steps, I know we jumped around a bit between the AWS console and your IDE, where you were showing us a little bit of the config, a little bit of the application itself, or starting up the Tomcat application. Really, you just have a handful of discrete steps. And again, this is very much a garden path for a set of applications for .NET and Java, but you have your application running on your deployed infrastructure. You install the App2Container CLI. You profile the applications that are running through a CLI command. You select the application that you want. App2Container will then generate the necessary artifacts. And then App2Container also helps you to deploy that application with said artifacts to the cloud. Now, this is, again, didn't seem entirely hands-off, right? We still walked through some of those configurations and understood what those are. But when I think about sort of this set of challenges to deploying or to containerizing and then deploying, we basically have narrowed the scope of the things that you as a developer need to learn and understand to go from 0 to 1 from this very, very, very large mountain of methods and objects and entities to a much smaller sort of surface area, which seems a lot more approachable to me.
That's right. I mean, it also helps with the scale, and now you can take on more applications. And with the limited skill sets that you have within the organization, when there are very few cloud experts who can do all these things manually. So now you are kind of really enabling the common developers to kind of take advantage of this and move the applications faster to the cloud.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think this is going to work really well for the kind of applications that you're targeting here.
Great. Well, this is very exciting to me, and again, it is still very much early days for App2Container, right? We launched earlier on this week or the week prior, shortly before this episode, essentially, and it seems like there's a lot of things I can imagine I want to see down the road from something like this. I guess if we're opening up that discussion around potential future features or roadmap where applicable, something that I would like to see is, more language expansion, right? I think that when we started this conversation around, what is the value of containerization? What are these roadblocks that exist? I know we dove deep on Java and .NET and a lot of the functionality already that we saw in the service or in the tool is centered around that. But, I think that value around containerizing applications exists cross-language. And so not only is extending the functionality or the feature sets for .NET and Java important, but I'm excited to see this hopefully someday for lots of other languages as well. Because, one could argue that some of these languages that are more prevalent nowadays maybe have a broader set of resources to enable containerization. But I still think that this sort of experience of going through a CLI and just in a few discrete steps, being able to pop out a containerized application and easily deploy that to the cloud, that's a really enticing value proposition. So I'm excited to see that down the line. Hopefully.
Absolutely. I mean, when we work with our customers, we try to understand, where their real pain points are. The kind of applications, like .NET applications, they don't see a way forward. They really need some help. And some of this, the existing Java applications running on for a long time. I think those are the applications they really wanted us to help with. So that's the one we picked up as a starting point. And some of the other languages they mentioned, some of them are already probably modern, so they don't need a big modernization support. But to your point, kind of accelerating the containerization process, it's a big value for even those applications too. We definitely will be looking forward to kind of expanding the support, adding more and more languages, and kind of even the targets. Like for example, today we are supporting deployment to ECS and EKS. There may be additional targets like Fargate or Lambda. And also there are opportunities that we can expand into, like how do we take these applications, like big monolithic applications, can we kind of break this down and create more microservices kind of architectures and containerize each of those services? I think there are a lot of possibilities. I mean, I think that in my opinion, the modernization is not a done thing. It's a continuous thing. There's going to be a continuous modernization throughout our lifetime.
Yeah, again, as new technologies and deployment vectors come into play, the need to be able to transport applications in the way that they're authored or the way they already exist onto these new platforms is going to be an ongoing battle. I think that's very well said. And even to the point before around the value of Docker being build once and deploy anywhere is something that even Java had a lot of claim to fame around, and what becomes easy or what is the easiest solution is not just subjective, but will change over time as these new technologies are released. So well put in that it's sort of this ongoing battle. But hopefully it doesn't feel just like a battle, but this ongoing ability to optimize and deliver more value over time, right? Like we wouldn't be worrying about these things if there wasn't an upside to them. So hopefully the juice will be worth the squeeze. Just have to sort of find the way to get there.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I think that about does it for us in this session. We have a little bit we're going to close out on after this, but again, Prakash, lead PM on application modernization, talking to us a little bit about App2Container. And so if folks want to get started with App2Container, again, it's a CLI. You can go and install it, get started with it. We have links to both the Jeff Barr blog post, the product page, and the documentation. We will get those thrown in chat. I know a lot of people have been also asking about whether this video will be available after the fact. By default, right after this episode's over, it'll be available here on our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/AWS/videos. Additionally, we'll be uploading this to YouTube, and we even have a podcast. So if you'd prefer to be listening to something like this, you can find us on a lot of the major podcasting platforms. If you need links, we'll try.
By the way, the tool is free. There's no fee for this.
Yeah. So again, it's a CLI. It's free. Install it. Do with it what you wish. And many of the target or all of the target deployment vectors right now currently for those artifacts, in addition to the Docker file, are AWS oriented. Things like ECS, task definitions, networking configuration files, and so on. Awesome. Well, thank you, Prakash. Rob and I will be right back to close out the show, but sit tight. We've got just a few minutes left in the show. We'll see you soon. All right, we're back, finally here. It's the coziest part of every episode where we close out. We talk a little bit about what we have on the horizon for the show. But, it's been a long episode. We're almost 3 hours in. So, Rob, why don't you remind me, what did we cover? Because I think I'm starting to lose it. It's so many things we talk about in the show.
Yeah, well, as far as the demos go, we looked at Code Guru and the two major components of Code Guru, the profiler, which is a sampling profiler, as well as the reviewer. And then we saw demos of both of those, of course. And then we also took a deep dive into App2Container.
Yeah, some exciting stuff. It's all coming back to me now. But we again, what's next? The show where we try to cover all of these launches in depth. We bring the service team members on. We try to get those demos so that you can see most tangibly what it's going to look like for you to use the service. I know it's great to see some of these launches on the reInvent stage or whatever the main stage or the big announcements and the videos that come along with them. But I think that as a developer, the thing that I care about the most is what is this going to look like for me to use it? Does it work for the workloads that I need them to work for, and is this something that's too scary for me to ever get my feet wet with? And hopefully some of those demos help to answer some of those questions that folks have. But it is time for the thing that we do at the end of every single episode. I know it's silly, but when I think about the launches that we cover, this is something that no other launch channel does. No, you don't see this at the end of the blogs. Andy Jassy doesn't get up at the end of the reInvent keynote and go like, all right, I'm going to play the game that Nick and Rob play on What's Next and string all these launches together. But it always makes it a little more tangible for me. So we play this game. We don't have a name for it yet, right?
We don't need a name for it, I don't think. Or we can come up with one as the need demands.
Okay, all right. And audience, if you have any ideas for this game,
Yeah.
Please throw them in there. We would love to get those thrown in. We will give you credit. I promise. I won't just steal all your questions and ask them like I do on the show. But what we do is we take all of the launches that we saw a demo from in a given episode, and we try to imagine what the ideal company or customer or developer would be for this episode. So the prompt I give is like, if you were building an application and you saw this episode and you see all those launches that happened, what would your application look like if you were this was your ideal episode, right? And so it's always a silly game. We punt it back and forth between the guests or the two hosts, and we try to come up with this application of this outline of what this customer would look like. So again, Rob mentioned the launches, Code Guru, which includes, let's say, Profiler and Reviewer as two separate aspects for the sake of this demo, and App2Container. So this one, I don't know, this one's pretty broad, right? On other weeks, we've had topics that could be a little more niche, maybe centered around very particular use cases. But this one, I feel like we have so many ways we can go with, right?
Yeah, well, let's get chat involved in this. I mean, so the ask is, the two major things that we covered today are Code Guru and App2Container. How would you combine those to build something really cool? Right. So it's almost like a Iron Chef. These are the two secret ingredients. So, Nick, what do you think?
I had a funny but like almost like rule breaking answer here. I was gonna wonder if you could use Code Guru static reviewer or analyzer to like lint the Docker files that App2Container generates to like quality check how good App2Container is. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think I had a very similar idea. I mean, we saw Nikunj gave us that one slide where he showed all the different axes of things that the reviewer will look for. And I think one of those axes in the future could be portability. We can fold portability directly into Code Guru Reviewer, and it can just run the compatibility analyzer. Why not, right? And it can just say like, hey, this pull request, while it seems to be, hopefully you've tested it, it does functionally what you think it's going to do, but you're making this very interesting API call that depends on a native Windows API. So for the best example is process.execute, right? Process.execute is it's basically going to look for a local dependency. And at the point at which you encode it in a string, no tooling will be able to figure that out. It's the equivalent of like a JavaScript eval statement, right? And I'm sure the portability analyzer can find that. It'd be really cool if the Code Guru Reviewer can say, if you do this, you're not going to be able to port the app in the future. We can't guarantee that it's going to be able to run in a container. Are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I mean, because at the end of the day, like, containers are only as portable as the dependencies that they have or what you're injecting into them, right? Like, you can have this portable application that's really just your entire Windows operating system with everything under the sun under it, but, is that scalable in an optimized fashion? I guess the jury is out, or that's up to you to decide that. But, I mean, we spoke about how the Code Guru team runs Code Guru Profiler on Code Guru Profiler. So this concept of dogfooding or antagonistically using AWS services to measure other AWS services is not too unheard of. So yeah, maybe this one isn't exactly one customer, but it's just in the Iron Chef example, it's like using one ingredient. I don't know. Yeah, it's sorry, I'm breaking down the analogy now at this point, but no, this was definitely an interesting one.
I also think eating your own dog food or going meta with these services is more common than you think, right? Because IAM is a really great example. IAM itself uses IAM, so it's it actually comes up quite often, right? I mean, the Watchtower uses Watchtower, and so lots of things. I think this happens because these services, their charter is so broad. They solve a broad problem, and so they themselves, by being virtue of a piece of software that has to do all these things, uses itself.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting point. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head other services that could potentially do this in a way. On the concept of like anomaly detection, it's like does the CloudWatch anomaly detection service, does it use CloudWatch anomaly detection to detect when the logs at the service running anomaly detection is in alarm state, for example, right? Like we talk about this a lot, right? Like especially these higher level services that use underlying services, right? So I know that like differing level of abstraction is not necessarily the case that we're talking about here today, but when we try to understand behaviors and dependencies of high level services on lower level services, these things oftentimes come out. Hopefully for the better, right? If you develop a product like you pointed to IAM, right? If you really have a good and sound abstraction, you don't need these, I guess these equivalents of like CSS statements with like a bang important on top of them to just squash that other abstraction to work for this use case. These interlocking and interdependent services at varying levels of abstraction just go to show how sort of like battle tested some of them can be. So that's always good to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, I guess it was a little bit easier also this week because we only had in reality 2 launches, right? The third is really the wild card, right? I feel like it's always easy for us to find 2 of the 3, put them together, and it's always the third that gets you. But we got.
I also feel like today, although I think we kind of tricked the audience because we said there are only 2 launches, but in reality there were really 3 launches. In another world, the Code Guru profiler and the Code Guru reviewer could be 2 totally separate services.
Yeah.
It's just that they happen to share an umbrella service name.
Yeah, and I think, if we then, it raises the question, like, why are they the same service, right? Like, why not 2 separate services? And I think that when we try to work backwards from solving customer problems and delivering value, even though the problems being, passive versus active in the software development process and profiling being very different, the core developer value is catching bugs earlier on, reducing their blast radius, and allowing your developers to be authoring features instead of dealing with these issues. So when we bubble it up to that, it starts to make a bit more sense.
Absolutely.
But some housekeeping stuff as we work to close out the stream here. I know there's many people that are probably still following along in Twitch chat. We had some technical difficulties over on the LinkedIn side that we'll be hammering away on after we close today's stream. But a few different things. So one, we have the survey. I hinted towards that at the start of the show. If you are interested in giving us feedback, we'd love to hear it. Anything you'd like to see, anything you saw that you didn't like, anything in between, we'd love to hear it. So fill out the survey. We've got the link provided there in chat. You also will get $10 of promotional credit on your AWS account. So in addition to any of the free tiers, you can use that credit to experiment or try out any of the services. And additionally, we actually have our date for the next episode, which is going to be 2 weeks from now. So if today is the 10th, our next episode is going to be on the 24th of July. Same time, same place, twitch.tv/AWS, and on LinkedIn as well. Let's see, we have a question in chat here. So I guess this question is actually going back to Apt2Container a little bit, but Lil Ricky is wondering if there are ways to break the new functionality in Apt2Container, like if they port an application but then the containerized app crashes, will the inventory still report the crashed application? I don't know, actually. It's a good question. I think the idea is that for Apt2Container, my perception, Rob, is that it's more on the porting side and not on the continuous monitoring of it. So if the application crashes while it's running in its containerized state, that A2C is not as much going to be able to trigger the alarms and generate alarms around that. That sounds like more of a downstream problem.
Yeah, little Ricky, that should be pretty easy to do if you just write a really simple .NET application that throws an exception. If you port it, it'll probably port. But what will happen is that the Apt2Container is not doing anything for you with respect to reporting or telemetry, and that'll just, probably what it'll do is just write that out to standard out, and then that'll be aggregated by whatever depending on whether you put it in ECS or EKS, it'll have the standard logging capabilities that you can use to look at what happened.
Yeah, or even in EC2. I know folks that are new to containerization, there's a whole bound of questions that they may not be familiar with, but you can just pipe that standard out from the container and log that and set alarms around that with whatever fashion you would probably do if it was just on an EC2 instance to begin with.
Right on.
So cool. Yeah, next episode, July 24th at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Same time, same place, same hosts. To my knowledge, Rob and I will hopefully be back here. Again, love the questions. Thank you again to everyone who's tuned in on both Twitch as well as on LinkedIn. You will see it in just a moment on our closing screen, but we also are available as podcasts. So if you're looking to catch up on past episodes, maybe you only got some of the content from today, this is available on many of the major streaming platforms. I think the big ones that I like to listen to are on Spotify, I believe Apple Music as well. But check us out. You can search for that through AWS What's Next on those podcasting platforms. I will try to have a link to those in chat as well so you can more easily find that. But with that, I guess that's going to close out episode 7. Anything I forgot, Rob?
I think that covers it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone who tuned in. We will see you again in 2 weeks on the 24th. But otherwise, have a great weekend, and we will see you soon. Take it easy, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.